The crystal chandeliers of the Plaza Hotel dimmed to a soft golden hue, casting a warm glow over a sea of tailored tuxedos and designer evening gowns. The clinking of silver against fine china faded into a hushed silence as my husband stepped up to the microphone. Nathan stood in the center of the glittering main stage, flashing that signature magnetic smile at the gathered titans of New York real estate. He looked every bit the successful vice president, exuding a practiced charm that could sell ice to a blizzard. I stood 80 feet away, camouflaged by the shadows of the swinging kitchen service doors. Waiters rushed past me, carrying silver trays of champagne, their shoulders brushing my heavy silk gown, but my focus remained locked on the man under the spotlight. He adjusted his bow tie, a silk piece I had bought him for our anniversary, and began speaking into the microphone. His voice was a rich baritone, filling the opulent ballroom with a rehearsed speech about dedication, partnership, and the unwavering support of a good woman. The audience, captivated by his performance, offered polite murmurs of agreement. A few women in the front row even placed hands over their hearts. Standing just off the stage, radiating an air of undeniable ownership, was a 26-year-old blonde woman in a silver sequined dress. She was watching him with glowing adoration. Nathan thought he had won. He thought he had orchestrated a flawless public execution that would leave me disgraced and penniless while he secured his new life, his new woman, and my stolen wealth. He had spent months carefully laying the groundwork for my destruction, relying on my blind trust and my supposed ignorance. What Nathan failed to realize was that you never hand a 70-page legal contract to a chief compliance officer and expect her not to read the fine print. He thought he was the smartest predator in the room. He did not know that I had already forensically audited his entire shadow life, traced every stolen dollar, and quietly rigged this entire ballroom to detonate his career, his reputation, and his freedom. I looked down at the glowing screen of my phone. My thumb hovered over a single encrypted text message destined for the audiovisual booth upstairs. The message contained only one word: execute. My name is Roberta Rossi. I am 34 years old. If you have ever smiled at a man who was actively trying to ruin your life, while you secretly held the detonator to his, let me know your age in the comments below. Welcome to Samantha Told Stories. Hit the like button and subscribe, because you are going to want to take notes on this one. The path to this ballroom began exactly 48 days earlier. The air inside Terminal 4 of JFK International Airport smelled of roasted coffee beans and the damp wool of winter coats. It was a crisp Thursday evening. I stood near the International Arrivals Gate, holding a warm cardboard cup, watching the steady stream of travelers pushing luggage carts. My father, Dominic, stood beside me. As a retired forensic investigator for the New York State Attorney General, my father possessed a gaze that could strip a perjury suspect down to their core. He stood with his back straight, hands resting in the pockets of his trench coat, observing the crowd with the calculating eyes of a man who spent his life dismantling white-collar criminals. We were waiting for his sister to arrive from Rome, or so we thought, before her flight was delayed. My husband Nathan was supposedly shivering through a mandatory commercial site inspection in downtown Chicago. Just an hour prior, my phone had buzzed with a text from him, complaining about the sub-zero wind chill and the endless boardroom negotiations. As a compliance officer for a Manhattan hedge fund, my days were governed by risk assessment, verifiable data, and strict regulatory frameworks. I dealt in facts. I had built a solid career and owned my own assets long before Nathan and I exchanged vows. I trusted my models, and until that evening, I had trusted my husband. The arrivals board clicked, flashing the status of a delayed flight from Miami. The automatic glass doors slid open, letting in a draft of cold air as a new wave of passengers flooded the concourse. My eyes scanned the crowd out of pure habit. They drifted past, exhausted families, sunburnt tourists, and airline crew members. Then my gaze snagged on a familiar silhouette. It was a tailored camel hair overcoat, the exact coat I had picked up from the dry cleaners on Tuesday. It was Nathan. I blinked, convinced the harsh fluorescent lights of the terminal were playing tricks on my tired eyes. But the data, standing 30 feet in front of me, was undeniable. Nathan was not shivering in the freezing winds of the Midwest. His skin carried a fresh, deep bronze tan. He walked with a relaxed, confident stride, pulling a sleek designer carry-on bag. He was smiling, a genuine, relaxed expression I had not seen directed at me in over a year. But the tan was not the anomaly that made the breath catch in my throat. It was the woman clinging to his free arm. She looked young, perhaps 26, radiating that specific brand of curated perfection found in junior public relations executives. She wore a breezy linen outfit that defied the New York winter, her blonde hair falling in effortless waves. She leaned into Nathan, her shoulder pressing flush against his chest, laughing at something he whispered in her ear. They stopped right in the middle of the bustling concourse. Nathan dropped the handle of his luggage. He turned to her, wrapped a hand around her waist, and pulled her close. He kissed her. It was not a quick, cautious peck. It was deep, practiced, and entirely public. It was the synchronized movement of two people intimately used to each other's bodies. The cardboard coffee cup in my hand buckled. Hot liquid sloshed over the plastic lid, searing the skin of my thumb, but I did not feel the burn. A high-pitched ringing sound filled my ears, drowning out the overhead announcements and the chatter of the terminal. The floor beneath my heels felt like it had sharply tilted, dropping my stomach into a bottomless void. 15 years of shared history, joint tax returns, holiday dinners, and whispered promises evaporated in a single fraction of a second. The physical shock hit my chest like a blunt instrument. Every instinct in my nervous system screamed at me to march across the polished tile, hurl the scalding coffee at his tanned face, and detonate my marriage right there at gate 24. I took a ragged breath and took one step forward. Before the toe of my shoe could touch the next tile, a heavy, calloused hand clamped down on my shoulder. The grip was firm, unyielding, and anchored me instantly to the spot. I turned my head. Dominic had not missed a single detail. His sharp eyes were locked on Nathan and the blonde woman. My father did not look angry. He did not look shocked. He looked entirely analytical, his investigator instincts taking over the exact moment my reality fractured. He did not offer a paternal hug or a sigh of pity. He stepped in front of me, shielding my frozen form from Nathan's line of sight, behind a thick concrete pillar. "Let me go over there," I whispered, my voice sounding fragile and foreign to my own ears. "I need to confront him." Dominic gripped both of my shoulders, forcing me to meet his gaze. "Sweetheart, listen to me," he murmured, his voice a low, terrifyingly calm rumble. "Tears and public shouting matches only lose face." My chest heaved as I fought for air. "He's right there," I choked out. "If you confront him now, he will lie," Dominic explained, his tone even and devoid of emotion. "He will spin the narrative, he will call you hysterical, and most importantly, he will immediately move to hide his assets. Guys like him run on emotional reactions. It is fuel to them. Do not give him the fuel." I stared at my father, the hot tears stinging the corners of my eyes, slowly cooling into something hard and heavy. "Destroying a man's pride in an airport terminal is temporary," Dominic continued, releasing my shoulders. "Destroying his financial standing destroys his life. Let us teach him a lesson he will never forget." The cold, pragmatic wisdom of his words washed over the burning panic in my chest. He was right. A public scene would give Nathan the upper hand. It would alert the predator that he was being hunted. As the logic settled into my veins, a sharp buzzing sensation erupted against my hip. My phone was vibrating in my coat pocket. I pulled the device out with a trembling hand. The screen illuminated, flashing Nathan's contact photo, a picture of us smiling at a vineyard 2 years ago. My stomach churned with intense nausea. "Answer it," my father instructed softly, his eyes never leaving my face. "Put it on speaker." I closed my eyes for a split second, envisioning the secure lockbox in our penthouse, the joint accounts, the life I had built. I shoved the devastation into a dark, inaccessible box in my mind. I swiped the screen, answering the call, and forced my vocal cords to produce a bright, cheerful tone. "Hey, honey," I chirped. "How is freezing Chicago?" Nathan's voice drifted from the speaker, crisp and clear, accompanied by the faint background noise of the baggage claim carousel. "It is brutal, Roberta." He lied flawlessly, not a single trace of hesitation in his cadence. "The wind chill downtown is unbearable today. We have been stuck in freezing conference rooms negotiating this lease since 7 this morning. I am exhausted." I peered slightly around the edge of the concrete pillar. Nathan was standing by the oversized luggage belt, grinning down at the blonde woman as she trailed a manicured finger down the lapel of his coat. "Oh, that sounds awful," I replied, biting the inside of my cheek until I tasted a faint metallic tang. "Are you keeping warm?" "I am trying," he sighed, playing the corporate martyr to perfection. "I miss you. I will be so glad when this site inspection is over and I can come home to you." "I love you," I said, the words tasting like ash on my tongue. "Love you too, babe. Stay warm." The line clicked dead. I lowered the phone, staring at the darkened screen. The woman who had driven to the airport, expecting to have a quiet dinner with her father, was gone. In her place stood a compliance officer, armed with a forensic investigator, holding the undeniable truth. I looked back at Dominic. The tears were gone. The shock had sublimated into a chilling, terrifying clarity. "Let's go home," I said, my voice steady and hollow. "We have an audit to run." The psychological war had officially begun. The drive from Queens to the Upper West Side was a masterclass in suffocating tension. I sat in the passenger seat of my father's sedan, staring blankly at the wet asphalt of the Long Island Expressway blurring past the window. My father, Dominic, did not offer a soothing hand on my knee or a string of meaningless platitudes. He did not tell me everything was going to be all right, because as a man who had spent 30 years dissecting the financial ruin of trusting spouses, he knew it probably was not. Instead, his mind was already operating 3 moves ahead, analyzing the catastrophe through a lens of absolute pragmatism. "We need to map the blast radius," he stated, his voice slicing through the heavy silence of the car. "When we get to the penthouse, we bypass the living room and go straight to your secure lockbox. We need to verify your baseline assets immediately." I nodded numbly, my fingers gripping the edge of my coat. The image of Nathan pulling the blonde woman close, playing on an endless, torturous loop behind my eyelids. As a compliance officer, my life was structured around mitigating risk for a multi-billion-dollar hedge fund. I hunted for anomalies in datasets, anticipating disaster before it struck. Yet I had entirely missed the catastrophic failure in my own marriage. Nathan and I had met 6 years ago at a charity gala for urban development. He was ambitious, charming, and possessed a relentless drive to conquer the Manhattan commercial real estate market. I was drawn to his confidence, misinterpreting his narcissism as sheer determination. We married, signed a standard prenuptial agreement that supposedly protected the assets I had built before him, and moved into my penthouse. I thought I had mitigated all the risk. I was about to find out exactly how wrong I was. As soon as we stepped through the heavy oak door of my apartment, the familiar scent of cedar and expensive candles felt entirely foreign. The space suddenly looked less like a home and more like a compromised crime scene. My father did not even take off his coat. He pointed toward my home office, a sleek room lined with legal texts and framed certifications. "Open the lockbox," he commanded. "Check the physical tokens first." I walked to the built-in bookshelf, entering the alphanumeric sequence to the concealed safe. I expected to find my grandmother's vintage jewelry, my emergency cash reserves, and, most importantly, the encrypted hardware wallet and banking tokens that secured my liquid premarital capital. I pulled the heavy steel door open, and my lungs instantly seized. The safe was practically hollow. The velvet pouches holding the jewelry were gone. The manila envelope containing $10,000 in emergency cash had vanished. But the most terrifying discovery was the empty space where the black hardware wallet should have been. Nathan had not just broken my vows in an airport terminal. He had executed a surgical financial slaughter right under my nose. I stared into the gaping metal void, the silence ringing in my ears. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. A betrayal of the heart was a tragedy, but this was a meticulously calculated extraction. My father stood right behind me, his gaze sweeping over the empty shelves. He did not offer a comforting word. He reached out and gently pushed the metal safe door shut. The heavy click echoed through the quiet office, sounding like a prison cell locking. "Grab your laptop," he instructed, his tone devoid of panic. "Grab every bank statement you can find. We are going to work." My vision blurred, the urge to collapse onto the floor threatening to overwhelm me. I had just seen my husband kissing another woman, and now I was robbed blind in my own sanctuary. But seeing the unyielding resolve in Dominic's eyes grounded me. He was not looking at a devastated daughter. He was looking at a partner in an investigation. I wiped a single stray tear from my cheek, squared my shoulders, and nodded. We relocated to the massive glass dining table, where Nathan and I hosted countless dinner parties for his pretentious real estate colleagues. Within minutes, the pristine surface was covered in file folders, glowing laptop screens, and legal pads. I spent my days building predictive models and hunting down financial anomalies. I knew exactly how to track patterns. My father knew exactly how men like Nathan hid their dirty money. Together, we were about to become my husband's absolute worst nightmare. I opened my secure web browser, attempting to log into our joint checking account. Access denied. A cold sweat broke out across the back of my neck. I tried my personal savings account, the one I supposedly controlled entirely. Access denied. "He locked me out," I whispered, my voice trembling with a mixture of sheer terror and boiling rage. "He changed the security protocols." "Do not panic," Dominic instructed, uncapping a black pen over his legal pad. "You are the primary account holder. Use your compliance access to bypass the standard consumer locks. Route it through the secondary verification matrix." My training kicked into high gear. I was no longer a betrayed wife staring at the wreckage of her life. I was a technician, reviewing a compromised system. The personal pain was shoved into a dark, airtight box. Only numbers mattered now. My fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing the standard portals and accessing the raw ledger data directly from the financial institution's server. The screen refreshed, displaying a series of devastating figures. My personal savings account, which held over $80,000 just last month, now displayed a balance of $42.10. The joint checking account was overdrawn by $600. He had taken everything. My father began writing rapidly on the legal pad, creating strict columns. "Cash reserves compromised," he muttered, tracing a line. "Liquid assets drained. He is establishing a pattern of extraction." I stared at the glowing screen tracking the transaction history. The money had not vanished overnight. Nathan had been slowly bleeding the accounts dry for the last 6 months, transferring thousands of dollars at a time into a routing number I did not recognize. The cash was just the appetizer, Dominic analyzed, pointing the tip of his pen at the screen. The affair with that PR girl is the symptom, but this financial hemorrhage is the actual disease. He is preparing for an exit strategy. He is planning to leave you and trying to ensure he takes your entire net worth when he walks out the door. I sat back in my ergonomic chair. The illusion of my 6-year marriage dissolved completely, leaving behind a stark, horrifying reality. Nathan was not just a cheating husband. He was a sociopathic predator. He had smiled across this very dining table, poured me expensive wine, and told me he loved me, all while systematically plotting to ruin me financially. The woman who had driven to JFK Airport to pick up her father was gone. The grief that had threatened to suffocate me burned away, leaving behind a deep, cold, toxic fury. My father recognized the shift in my demeanor. The soft, accommodating wife was dead. I looked at the missing funds, the unfamiliar routing numbers, and the locked-out accounts. Nathan was going to walk through our front door in a few hours, expecting to find his clueless, obedient wife waiting with dinner, completely unaware of the digital massacre he had committed. "Tell me exactly what to do," I said firmly, meeting my father's eyes. "Tell me how we trap him." Dominic smiled a sharp, dangerous expression that perfectly mirrored the newfound ice in my veins. "We let him think he is winning," he said softly. "We smile, we serve dinner, and we let him feel like the smartest predator in the room. And while he is looking the other way, completely blinded by his own arrogance, we build a financial guillotine to execute his total ruin." The sharp metallic click of the front door unlocking echoed through the foyer. I smoothed the front of my silk blouse, taking a slow, steady breath to regulate my pulse. My father had slipped out the service elevator 20 minutes prior, taking his legal pads and the initial forensic outlines with him. The dining room table was now pristine, set for two, with linen napkins and crystal wine glasses. I walked toward the entryway, just as Nathan dropped his leather weekender bag onto the hardwood floor with a heavy, theatrical thud. He rubbed his hands together, performing an exaggerated shiver. "God, the wind off Lake Michigan is brutal right now," he groaned, leaning in to kiss my cheek. I caught the faint, lingering scent of coconut, hotel soap, and an expensive floral perfume that definitely did not belong to me. I forced my facial muscles into a sympathetic smile. "You must be frozen," I said, keeping my tone perfectly light. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a cheap plastic snow globe, sliding it across the marble kitchen island. Inside the tacky dome, white flakes settled over a miniature Chicago skyline. "Saw this at the airport gift shop," he lied smoothly, loosening his silk tie. "Thought of you while I was waiting out the boarding delay." I stared at the plastic dome. It was a literal, enclosed fake reality he expected me to live inside. While he was soaking up the sun and buying diamonds for his public relations girl, he grabbed a $10 trinket to pacify his naive wife. The glass sphere felt cold in my hand, a physical manifestation of his deceit. "It is beautiful," I murmured, setting it next to the stove. "Thank you." I pulled the roasted chicken from the oven, the scent of rosemary and garlic filling the space. We sat at the glass dining table, the exact spot where my father and I had just uncovered the first layer of his financial crimes. The psychological whiplash was staggering. As a compliance officer, I spent my days analyzing corporate risk, ensuring hedge fund managers did not cross regulatory lines. I was trained to detect fraud. Yet, sitting across from the man I married, I realized the greatest fraud was eating dinner in my own home. I poured him a generous glass of Cabernet Sauvignon, watching the dark red liquid swirl. Nathan took a long sip and immediately launched into a grand, fabricated tale about his grueling week. He spoke of intense boardroom negotiations, stubborn zoning officials, and the heavy burden of carrying his commercial real estate firm on his back. I sat, quietly, cutting my food into tiny, meticulous squares, listening to him weave a web of pure fiction straight to my face. The sheer audacity of his performance was sickening, yet I matched it beat for beat. I asked polite questions about his fake meetings and nodded with wide, admiring eyes. Encouraged by my apparent submission, his ego began to inflate, swelling to fill the entire room. Nathan always thrived on an audience. He possessed an insatiable need to be the smartest person in any room, a trait that had propelled his career but poisoned his character. The conversation inevitably shifted, and he turned his condescending gaze toward me. He asked how my week at the hedge fund had been, but he did not care about the answer. Before I could finish a sentence about a new regulatory framework I was building, he chuckled, shaking his head with a patronizing smirk. He leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine, and made a subtle, insulting remark about my career. He casually referred to my highly technical position as low-tier, spreadsheet pushing. He claimed that while my little numbers job was cute and kept me out of trouble, it simply could not compare to the high-stakes adrenaline-fueled world of his property acquisitions. He boasted that he dealt with tangible assets and real intellectual risk, whereas I just stared at glowing screens, arranging meaningless rows of data. The insult was designed to belittle me, to keep me squarely in my place, and to assert his dominance in our marriage. A few days ago, a comment like that would have sparked a fierce defensive argument. I would have proudly defended my intellect and my salary. Tonight, armed with the knowledge of his empty safe and his impending financial betrayal, I swallowed my pride. I looked down at my plate, letting my shoulders slump slightly, and agreed with him in a soft, submissive voice. I told him he was right that my work was boring and repetitive, and that I could never handle the immense pressure of his brilliant corporate life. My total capitulation was the ultimate high for him. His chest puffed out, and he gave me a knowing, arrogant glance entirely oblivious to the trap closing around his ankles. He truly believed he had broken my spirit, leaving me docile and compliant. After dinner, Nathan stretched his arms and let out a loud, manufactured yawn. He pulled his smartphone from his pocket, frowned, and complained that his battery was dead. He then grumbled that his company laptop was locked in a mandatory security update and asked if he could borrow my personal computer for a few minutes. He claimed he needed to check an urgent, highly confidential email from a client he had supposedly been negotiating with in the Midwest. This was the exact moment I had anticipated. While my father and I were investigating the empty lockbox earlier that afternoon, I had utilized my low-tier spreadsheet pushing skills to install a highly sophisticated, invisible keystroke logging software deep within my operating system. It was designed to run silently in the background, capturing every single alphanumeric character typed on the keyboard, bypassing any standard antivirus sweeps. I smiled sweetly, stood up, and retrieved my sleek silver laptop from the living room. I placed it gently on the table right in front of him, and even tilted the screen to accommodate his height. I told him to take his time, and that I would go start cleaning up the kitchen. I walked away, turning my back on him, heading toward the kitchen sink. I turned on the faucet, letting the warm water rush over my hands to hide any sound of my racing heartbeat. I grabbed a sponge and began scrubbing a pristine plate, focusing intensely on the repetitive motion. But my eyes were fixed on his reflection in the dark glass of the oven door. Nathan eagerly opened the browser, confident in his own superiority. He typed rapidly, his fingers flying across the keys with the practiced ease of a man who spent his life hiding things. He assumed his digital footprints were entirely secure on a device belonging to his clueless wife. He did not use a virtual private network or bother to clear the cache because he felt invincible inside his own home. Every password, every secure login credential, every hidden offshore account portal, and every encrypted message he accessed over the next 15 minutes was silently captured, logged, and routed directly to a secure hidden folder I controlled. The software I utilized was untraceable, designed for high-level corporate espionage, but tonight it served a much more intimate purpose. He closed the laptop lid with a satisfying snap, walked into the kitchen, and kissed the top of my head arrogantly. He thanked me for the dinner, believing he had thoroughly outsmarted everyone in the room. He walked away to take a hot shower, leaving his luggage in the hallway. I stood by the sink drying my hands on a linen towel, staring at the silver computer resting on the glass table. He had no idea he had just handed me the master keys to his entire financial existence. As the sound of running water echoed from the master bathroom, I pulled out my phone and sent a quick text to my father. "We have the keys," I typed. The reply came seconds later. "Tomorrow we hunt." The scent of expensive dark roast coffee usually brought a sense of structured calm to my mornings before heading to the hedge fund. Today it smelled like adrenaline and impending ruin. Nathan had kissed my forehead, leaving a faint trace of coconut hotel soap in the air as he walked out the door to his commercial real estate firm. The deadbolt engaged with a heavy click, signaling the departure of my deceitful husband and the return of my forensic investigator father. Dominic stepped out of the guest room carrying his legal pad and a fresh pen. He walked straight to the glass dining table, pulling out the chair opposite mine. "Boot it up," he said, his voice a low, gravelly hum. "Let us see exactly what the predator was hunting for last night." I opened my laptop, my fingers hovering over the trackpad. As a compliance officer, I spent my days dissecting complex portfolios, identifying hidden liabilities that could cost my firm millions. I was accustomed to staring at dense numerical landscapes, but opening the hidden directory containing Nathan's keystroke logs felt entirely different. It was an invasion of the most intimate betrayal imaginable. I double-clicked the encrypted folder. The screen flickered, displaying a long, continuous string of characters. To the untrained eye, it was a chaotic mess of alphanumeric jargon. To my data-driven mind, it was a perfectly readable, devastating confession. I quickly parsed the raw data, separating the URLs from the usernames and passwords. Nathan had logged into 3 different financial institutions during his 15-minute session on my computer. 2 of those entities were offshore banking portals I had never heard of during our entire 6-year marriage. I printed the decrypted credentials, the quiet whir of the laser printer sounding unnaturally loud in the silent penthouse. I slid the warm sheets of paper across the glass table to Dominic. My father adjusted his reading glasses, his demeanor shifting instantly from a visiting parent to a senior investigator conducting a high-level federal inquiry. For the next 3 hours, our dining room transformed into an operational war room. Dominic methodically breached Nathan's hidden financial portfolios, one by one. There was no hesitation in his movements. He knew exactly how men like Nathan attempted to obscure their ill-gotten wealth. He bypassed the standard checking accounts and dove straight into the encrypted wealth management portals, tracking routing numbers and wire transfers with terrifying cold precision. As we dug deeper into the digital labyrinth, the numbers began to paint a horrifying picture. Nathan was not just siphoning money from our joint checking or draining my personal savings. He was operating on a scale that shattered the boundaries of a simple domestic dispute. The first major anomaly was a massive withdrawal from a corporate escrow account tied directly to his real estate firm. "Wait," I said, leaning closer to the screen, my eyes scanning the ledger. "That is corporate capital. That is not our money." Dominic traced the line of data with his pen. "He is embezzling," he stated, his voice devoid of shock. "He is authorizing payouts for phantom consulting services, routing his firm's capital into these shell companies." The scope of the conflict had violently expanded. This was no longer just about a husband breaking his marriage vows or sleeping with a junior public relations executive. This was federal wire fraud. Nathan had crossed the line from a narcissistic cheater into a calculating, remorseless criminal. But the true devastating blow came when my father opened a portal tied to a prominent national bank. Dominic frowned, leaning closer to the monitor. "Roberta, confirm the exact address of this penthouse for me." I recited the address, a knot of pure dread suddenly forming in my stomach. I explained that I had purchased this apartment entirely on my own, 3 years before I even met Nathan. It was my premarital asset, solely in my name, and the mortgage was completely paid off. My father went deathly silent. He clicked on a digital icon downloading a massive file of loan origination documents. He turned the laptop screen toward me. Staring back at me was a home equity line of credit, a HELOC, taken out against my penthouse just 4 months ago. The principal amount drawn was a staggering $750,000. My lungs seized. The air was sucked from the room. I frantically scrolled through the digital paperwork, my eyes desperately searching for an explanation. Right there on the final page of the loan agreement was my signature, except I had never signed it. I stared at the elegant sweeping loops of my name, perfectly replicated. "He forged it," I whispered the words, tasting like ash. "A vice president of real estate cannot forge a document of this magnitude alone," Dominic analyzed, pointing at the electronic notary stamp. "The bank requires knowledge-based authentication for a loan this size. Someone on the inside had to bypass the security protocols." I examined the stamp, recognizing the name of the wealth management firm. It was an elite boutique agency often utilized by my mother-in-law, Lorraine. Nathan had colluded with a corrupt contact in his mother's social circle to bypass the verification process, leveraging the equity of my safe haven. The home I had worked grueling hours to afford to secure a massive pile of cash. The stakes in the room skyrocketed. The penalty for this level of financial deception was decades in a federal penitentiary. "Where did the money go?" I demanded, my voice trembling with a mixture of sheer terror and boiling rage. "Find out where he wired my equity!" Dominic was already typing, his fingers hammering the keys to track the digital footprint of the disbursement. The $750,000 had not stayed in the account for more than 48 hours. It had been bundled with the embezzled corporate funds and wired directly to an LLC registered in Delaware. From there, my father traced the Delaware entity to its primary holding, pulling up a county property registry. The screen refreshed, displaying a pristine, high-resolution photograph of a sprawling, modern summer house located in the Hamptons. It featured expansive glass windows, a private pool, and direct beach access. Dominic pulled the ownership deed for the property. The house was not registered under Nathan's holding company. It was registered under 2 individual names as co-owners, Nathan Pierce and Audrey Lane. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Nathan had not just stolen my emergency funds to buy a snow globe. He had stolen the equity out of the very roof over my head, effectively putting my Manhattan penthouse at risk of foreclosure so he could purchase a luxury love nest with his 26-year-old mistress. I was literally financing my husband's high society affair. Every time they hosted a weekend party in the Hamptons, they were doing it on my dime. They were drinking expensive champagne and laughing on a deck paid for by the security I had built for myself before he ever entered my life. I stared at the glowing screen, the image of the Hamptons house burning itself into my retinas. The initial shock and the suffocating grief evaporated, completely replaced by a chilling, absolute clarity. Nathan thought I was just a quiet, submissive spreadsheet pusher. He thought he could steal my home, forge my name, and escape to the beach without consequence. He had severely underestimated the woman he married. I slowly closed the laptop, the satisfying click echoing in the quiet dining room. I looked at my father, and we shared a silent, unbreakable vow. Nathan had crossed into federal territory, and we were going to ensure he drowned in the very debt he had created. We were going to map the entire digital blast radius and construct a financial guillotine that would sever him from his stolen empire. But to secure the final proof we needed to penetrate the heavily shielded trust funds managed by his mother's corrupt contact, and for that I needed someone whose digital skills operated far beyond the boundaries of standard compliance. The digital architecture of the corrupt wealth management firm was impenetrable from a standard consumer access point. My father and I had hit a reinforced firewall, trying to trace the final destination of the stolen home equity funds. We knew Nathan had colluded with someone in his mother's elite circle to bypass the authorization, but proving the flow of capital required a level of technical intrusion I simply did not possess. I needed a ghost. I needed Leo. Leo was the senior cybersecurity architect at my hedge fund. He was 28, brilliant, and possessed a quiet disdain for the arrogant Wall Street executives he was forced to protect. He spent his days building impenetrable digital fortresses, and his nights finding ways to break them. We had cultivated a mutual respect over the years, a silent understanding between two people who preferred data over office politics. I did not call him. I knew Nathan might be monitoring my corporate devices. Instead, I left a physical note inside a manual on regulatory compliance I returned to Leo's desk, requesting to meet at a specific coffee shop in the garment district, an off-the-grid location far from our usual midtown haunts. The cafe was small, smelling faintly of roasted espresso and damp wool coats. Leo sat in a corner booth, his laptop already open, his posture relaxed but hyper-vigilant. He wore a faded gray hoodie that offered perfect camouflage in the bustling city. I slid into the booth across from him, setting a heavy, encrypted flash drive on the scratched wooden table. "I need you to break something I said," keeping my voice low. "It is personal, but it intersects with massive corporate fraud." Leo did not ask for a sob story. He glanced at the drive, then back up at me. He understood the severity of the request. He took the drive, plugging it into an air-gapped port on his machine. "Give me the parameters," he murmured, his fingers flying across the keyboard with a speed that made my eyes blur. I recited the specific routing numbers we had extracted from Nathan's keystroke logs and the name of the boutique wealth management firm. Leo initiated a complex brute force algorithm attacking the encrypted cloud servers where Nathan had hidden his shadow ledgers. For 20 agonizing minutes, the screen remained a chaotic cascade of code. Then a green progress bar materialized, inching across the display as the military-grade encryption unspooled. The directory snapped open, revealing a staggering volume of raw, unfiltered data. Leo had not just cracked a single account. He had downloaded the complete, unredacted duplicate of Nathan's entire offshore server. We plunged into the digital labyrinth. My father had taught me how to read the spaces between the numbers, but what we found was far more blatant than I had anticipated. Nathan was running a sprawling, sophisticated money laundering ring. I tracked the flow of capital. The embezzled funds from his commercial real estate firm and the $750,000 stolen from my penthouse equity did not just sit in the Delaware LLC. They were being systematically washed. "Look at this routing protocol," Leo said, pointing a pen at the screen. "The LLC is funneling the dirty cash into a 501c3 nonprofit organization in small, untraceable increments." I stared at the name of the charity, the Pierce Foundation for Urban Arts. The realization struck me like a physical blow. It was my mother-in-law, Lorraine Pierce. Lorraine was a fixture on the Upper East Side charity circuit, a status-obsessed socialite who valued optics and pedigree above all else. She had always treated me with thinly veiled condescension, viewing my quiet compliance career as a tragic waste of potential compared to the high-profile lives of her peers. She hosted lavish galas, raised funds for the arts, and maintained a pristine public image of aristocratic grace. She was using her philanthropic empire as a massive washing machine for her son's stolen wealth. Leo pulled the federal tax disclosures, cross-referencing the employer identification numbers. Lorraine Pierce was listed as the primary beneficiary and registered agent for the entire network of fraudulent shell companies. The clean money flowed out of the charity and directly into the Hamptons' property deed and high-end retail accounts. Nathan had not just compromised his own integrity. He had actively, legally implicated his mother in a federal money laundering conspiracy. Lorraine had allowed him to park millions of dollars of illicit capital directly under her name, utilizing her pristine social standing as an impenetrable shield. She literally traded her daughter-in-law for a Hampton summer house and an influx of dirty cash. As we mapped the staggering scale of the corporate embezzlement, my eyes drifted to a subfolder labeled with a string of random dates. I instructed Leo to open it. It was a meticulously organized archive of digital receipts for Nathan's personal expenditures. I scrolled past exorbitant charges for private chartered flights, luxury hotel suites in Miami, and exclusive dining clubs. Then, a specific PDF document caught my eye. It was an invoice from an internationally renowned ultra-exclusive jeweler located in the Diamond District. Leo clicked the file, illuminating the screen. It was a receipt for a custom-cut, flawless diamond tennis bracelet. The total purchase price was exactly $60,000, paid in full via a direct wire transfer from the Pierce Foundation charity account. I stared at the description of the diamonds, a cold, numbing sensation creeping up my spine as my eyes drifted to the timestamp at the top right corner of the invoice. I checked the date. I checked it again, my heart turning into a block of solid ice in my chest. He had purchased the $60,000 diamond bracelet for his 26-year-old mistress, Audrey Lane, on the exact day of our 6th wedding anniversary. The memory crashed over me with agonizing clarity. I had spent that entire evening sitting alone at our expensive glass dining table, eating cold takeout while staring at a small, untouched cake. Nathan had called me just after 8 o'clock, his voice dripping with fabricated stress, claiming he was trapped in an emergency litigation meeting regarding a hostile corporate takeover. He had told me he was exhausted, that he loved me, and that he would make it up to me later. While I was blowing out a candle in a quiet, empty house, convincing myself that my husband was a hard-working provider, he was standing in a high-security Manhattan showroom, dropping $60,000 of stolen money on diamonds for a junior public relations executive. The narrative layers overlapped flawlessly. The devastating emotional betrayal was inextricably linked to severe federal crimes. The grief that had threatened to suffocate me in the airport terminal was entirely gone. It was replaced by an unbreakable, terrifying resolve. I looked away from the receipt and met Leo's eyes across the booth. He did not offer pity. He simply offered his complete technical arsenal. "We are not just filing for divorce," I stated, my voice perfectly level. "We are executing a scorched earth purge." Leo nodded, his fingers returning to the keyboard. "Give me the directive. I want everything documented I instructed. Every wire transfer, every forged signature, every encrypted text message between Nathan and his mother. We are going to build an inescapable trap. When the blade drops, there will be no collateral escape routes for the Pierce family." But to secure the final piece of the puzzle, to prove Lorraine's active knowing complicity, I needed to hear the conspiracy straight from the source. I needed to infiltrate the Upper East Side. The air on the Upper East Side always felt thinner, as if the concentration of old money and curated prestige literally changed the atmospheric pressure. I stood on the limestone steps of Lorraine Pierce's townhouse, holding a ribbon-wrapped box from an exclusive artisan bakery. It was the perfect Trojan horse. Lorraine was a woman who navigated New York society with the ruthless precision of a seasoned general. She hosted charity luncheons, commanded a small army of domestic staff, and viewed her son Nathan as the crown jewel of her legacy. She had never been warm to me, viewing my practical compliance career as a tragic lack of ambition. I pressed the brass doorbell, smoothing the lapels of my tailored coat. A housekeeper let me in, guiding me toward the sunroom where Lorraine sat drinking imported tea and reviewing guest lists. She looked up, offering a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Roberta, what a surprise," she murmured, setting down her fountain pen. I handed over the pastry box, playing the role of the dutiful daughter-in-law. "I was just in the neighborhood, meeting with a regulatory client. I thought I would bring you those macarons you like." Lorraine accepted the box with practiced grace. "How thoughtful. And how is Nathan hurt? He works so tirelessly, I worry about his stress levels." "He is doing fine," I lied, my voice maintaining a pleasant, even cadence. As she instructed the housekeeper to plate the pastries, I excused myself to use the powder room. I did not go to the bathroom. I walked silently down the mahogany-paneled hallway, slipping directly into Lorraine's private home office. The room smelled of expensive leather and polished wood. I moved with quiet urgency. Leo had provided me with a microscopic audio interceptor, a device no larger than a button designed for corporate counter-surveillance. I reached under the edge of her heavy antique desk, pressing the adhesive backing firmly against the hidden surface near her primary telephone line. I stepped back out into the hallway just as the housekeeper turned the corner. I smiled, returning to the sunroom to finish a cup of tea before making my polite exit. 4 hours later, I sat in my dining room war zone with my father, Dominic. The skyline outside the penthouse windows had darkened to a deep indigo. Leo had routed the encrypted audio feed directly to a secure server we accessed via my laptop. The audio feed activated with a soft electronic crackle. We sat in absolute silence, listening to the ambient sounds of Lorraine's office. A few minutes passed before the unmistakable sound of a phone ringing echoed through the speakers. Lorraine answered immediately, putting the caller on speakerphone. Nathan's voice filled my dining room, clear and arrogant. "Is the venue secured?" he asked, bypassing any standard greeting. Lorraine sighed a sound of aristocratic impatience. "The Plaza Ballroom is booked, Nathan. The foundation paid the deposit this morning. The gala is set for the 28th. Dominic and I exchanged a sharp glance. The 28th was my 7th wedding anniversary. "Excellent," Nathan replied. "The timing has to be flawless. I need maximum attendance from the real estate board and the political action committee." I leaned closer to the speakers, my analytical mind trying to predict his strategy. We already knew he was laundering money through her charity, but an extravagant gala seemed counterintuitive for a man planning to steal his wife's equity and abandon her. "You need to maintain the illusion," Lorraine instructed, her tone shifting into a sharp, calculated cadence. "If you want to transition to Audrey without damaging your corporate reputation or your political prospects, you have to control the narrative." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. This was not just a cheating husband venting to his mother. This was a tactical planning session. "The vow renewal is the anchor," Nathan explained, his voice dripping with sociopathic confidence. "I will call Roberta up to the main stage. I will give a speech about our unwavering commitment. The optics will be unimpeachable. I will look like the ultimate dedicated husband holding his fragile wife together." I gripped the edge of the glass table, my knuckles turning white. "And the filing?" Lorraine asked. "My lawyers have the petition ready," Nathan confirmed. "They will file for an at-fault divorce the very next morning, before she even wakes up." "An at-fault divorce," Dominic muttered, his brow furrowing. "He needs grounds for that. New York is a no-fault state, unless he can prove severe misconduct." As if answering my father's question, Nathan continued. "The private investigator finished compiling the footage yesterday. He pulled months of the penthouse ring camera logs and synced them with selective edits of Roberta's phone records." My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs. We took every time she had late-night meetings with the IT department. Every time she came home exhausted and frustrated, Nathan boasted. We isolated the audio of our arguments and removed my instigations. The video paints a perfect picture of a mentally unstable, unfaithful wife acting erratically. It is brilliant, Lorraine praised, her voice devoid of a single ounce of human empathy. When the divorce hits the press, you will not be the villain abandoning his marriage. You will be the tragic victim who tried to save her publicly at the gala before finally realizing she was too far gone. I stared at the laptop speakers, entirely paralyzed by the sheer, breathtaking malice of the conspiracy. And Audrey Lorraine pressed. Audrey is managing the press release, Nathan assured her. Her PR connections are already drafting the leak to the society pages. They are framing it as a mutual separation due to Roberta's declining mental health. Audrey is a much better asset for the political run anyway. She understands optics. Roberta is too rigid, too obsessed with rules. I closed my eyes, the reality of the betrayal settling heavy and permanent in my chest. They were not just going to leave me. They were going to orchestrate a public theatrical execution. Nathan planned to trap me on a stage at the Plaza Hotel, forcing me to perform in a fake vow renewal, while he secretly held the dagger that would destroy my reputation, my career, and my sanity. Lorraine, his own mother, was actively coaching him on how to secure his future, while casually throwing her daughter-in-law to the wolves. She valued the prestige of having a politically connected PR executive in her circle far more than she valued my life. The audio feed clicked dead as they ended the call. The silence in my dining room was deafening. Dominic looked at me, his seasoned investigator eyes burning with a dark, lethal intensity. "This is a family syndicate," he stated, his voice like a grinding stone. "They are operating like a criminal enterprise." The microscopic shred of lingering humanity I held for Nathan evaporated. The parameters of my retaliation fundamentally shifted. A simple divorce was no longer sufficient. Taking back my stolen equity and leaving him bankrupt was merely a financial correction. It was too clean. I looked at my father, feeling a terrifying, absolute serenity wash over my entire nervous system. "We are not just stopping the divorce," I said, my voice perfectly level. "We are going to let him have his gala. We are going to let him gather the city's most powerful elites and his scheming mother into one room." Dominic nodded slowly, understanding the lethal geometry of my plan. "We are going to let him stand on that stage," I continued, "and then we are going to drop a digital guillotine that incinerates their entire legacy. But to ensure the trap snapped shut with inescapable legal force, I needed Nathan to blindly sign away his defense. I needed to feed his arrogance until he choked on it." The following evening, Nathan returned to the penthouse, his demeanor radiating a forced casual energy that immediately put my nerves on high alert. He had swapped his tailored suit jacket for a cashmere sweater, attempting to project the image of a relaxed, supportive partner. He poured himself a bourbon from the crystal decanter in the living room and walked into my home office, where I was ostensibly reviewing compliance models for my hedge fund. He leaned against the doorframe, swirling the amber liquid. "I need you to look at something, Roberta," he said, his tone light, conversational. "Just some administrative housekeeping." I turned in my ergonomic chair, my heart accelerating against my ribs. I knew exactly what this was. This was the extraction phase. He walked over and dropped a thick, heavy stack of legal documents onto my desk. The binding was pristine, the pages crisp and dense with corporate boilerplate. "What is this?" I asked, keeping my voice carefully neutral as I traced a finger over the cover page. "Just some restructuring," Nathan explained, taking a slow sip of his bourbon. "The market is volatile right now. My wealth manager and I were discussing shifting tax liabilities and corporate exposure. We need to insulate our assets." I flipped open the folder, my eyes scanning the text with practiced speed. It was a 70-page limited liability company formation document. He was proposing the creation of a new Delaware LLC, ironically named Zenith Holdings. The structure of this entity requires both of us to consolidate our liquid portfolios. Nathan continued pacing the length of my office. It is a standard protective measure. I am moving my commercial holdings into it, and I need you to transfer your personal stock portfolio and the deed to the Adirondack cabin. The audacity of the request was staggering. He was not satisfied with stealing the $750,000 in home equity. He wanted the mutual funds I had diligently built since my early 20s, and the lakeside property I inherited from my grandmother. He wanted to leave me absolutely destitute. Why do my personal premarital assets need to be absorbed into your commercial structures? I asked, injecting a perfect dose of hesitant confusion into my voice. The question triggered an instant volatile reaction. Nathan stopped pacing and loomed over my desk, his face twisting into an ugly mask of offended brilliance. The casual, supportive husband act vanished instantly, replaced by the aggressive, manipulative bully he truly was. Because you do not understand complex wealth management, Roberta, he snapped, raising his voice. You analyze risk for a living, but you cannot grasp basic asset protection. He leaned closer, slamming his hand flat against the desk. The sudden, sharp sound echoed in the quiet room, designed to intimidate me. I am trying to secure our future, he bellowed, gaslighting me with rapid, aggressive circles of financial jargon. Your hesitation is a direct insult to my expertise. My entire career is built on navigating capital markets, and your lack of trust proves you do not respect my judgment. I let him yell. I let him turn red in the face and wave his arms, playing the role of the cowed, intimidated wife perfectly. I understood the psychology of a narcissist. He needed me broken. He needed to believe he had completely dominated my will so he could secure the assets without interference. When he finally paused to take a breath, demanding I have the paperwork signed by Friday, I decided it was time to deploy the red herring. If I simply refused to sign or demanded my own lawyers review the contract, Nathan would become suspicious. He would delay the transfer, consult his attorneys, and potentially alter his timeline for the gala. I needed him to execute the LLC formation immediately, and I needed him to do it blindly, without any legal oversight. I looked down at the heavy stack of documents, my shoulders slumping inward. I forced my breathing to become shallow and rapid, mimicking the onset of a genuine panic attack. I thought about the sheer, unadulterated devastation of discovering his affair at the airport, the empty lockbox, and the agonizing realization of his mother's betrayal. I channeled that profound grief into a perfectly manufactured performance. I let out a harsh, jagged sob, burying my face in my hands. Hot, fat tears welled in my eyes and spilled over my cheeks. Nathan froze, utterly confused by my sudden, visceral breakdown. He had expected stubborn resistance or submissive compliance, not total hysterical collapse. "Roberta, what is wrong with you?" he demanded, his voice losing its aggressive edge, replaced by wary confusion. "I cannot sign these!" Nathan, I wailed, my voice cracking as I looked up at him through my tears. "I cannot transfer my assets." "Why?" he pressed, stepping closer. "Because they are gone," I lied, unleashing the most devastating fabrication of my life. "Or they are about to be." Nathan stared at me, the color beginning to drain from his face. "What are you talking about?" I dropped my hands to my lap, adopting the exact posture of a broken, terrified professional whose career was imploding. "The SEC is investigating my hedge fund," I sobbed, my chest heaving with manufactured terror. "Federal regulators raided the compliance servers this morning. They think I missed a massive insider trading anomaly. They're threatening to pull my license." Nathan stood paralyzed, the bourbon glass slipping slightly in his grip. My managing director pulled me into a closed-door meeting. I continued weaving the lie with intricate, terrifying detail. He said the regulators are moving to freeze all assets associated with the compliance officers until the audit is complete. They are going to lock my bank accounts, my stock portfolio, everything. The effect on Nathan was instantaneous and catastrophic. He was not concerned about my career, my reputation, or the potential loss of my license. He was consumed by sheer, unadulterated panic for his own stolen wealth. If federal regulators froze my assets, they would freeze the joint accounts. They would trace the fraudulent home equity line of credit. His entire shadow economy, his money-laundering charity, the Hamptons house, and the upcoming gala would be locked in a federal holding pattern. "Are you absolutely certain?" he asked, his voice dropping to a frantic whisper. "They told me to expect the freeze by Monday," I cried, wiping my eyes with the sleeve of my blouse. "I am so sorry, Nathan. I am terrified of ruining you. If I sign these LLC documents right now, the SEC might seize your commercial holdings too." Nathan's monumental arrogance, which had defined his entire existence, suddenly collided with his desperate greed. The illusion of control he so desperately craved was slipping through his fingers. He snatched the bourbon glass from the desk, downing the remaining liquor in a single violent gulp. "No," he said, pacing the room with erratic manic energy. "No, we can shield it. The LLC is already incorporated. It is a separate legal entity. If we execute the transfer tonight, before the federal freeze takes effect, the assets are legally separated from your personal name." He was swallowing the bait whole, completely blinded by his own panic. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice trembling with fake vulnerability. "I do not want to drag you down with me." "Sign the papers, Roberta," he ordered, his voice tight with desperation. "Sign them right now." "I need to read them first," I whimpered, reaching for the folder. "There is no time to read 70 pages, he shouted, snatching the folder back and flipping directly to the final signature lines. "We have to file this transfer with the state registry tomorrow morning, before the markets open. If you wait for the SEC to drop the hammer, we lose everything." I looked up at him, my tear-stained face a mask of absolute submission. "Okay," I whispered, reaching for the black pen on my desk. "I will sign them, but I need you to promise me this will protect us." "I promise," he said, his eyes wild with greed. "Just sign the damn line." I pressed the pen to the heavy paper, scribbling my signature on the primary transfer clause. Nathan did not hesitate. He did not call his ruthlessly efficient corporate attorneys to review the transaction. He did not scan the paragraphs above the dotted line. He snatched the pen from my hand and scribbled his counter-signature with an aggressive, sweeping flourish, entirely focused on securing the capital before the imaginary federal freeze. He grabbed the folder, clutching it tightly against his cashmere sweater. "I will handle the filing," he said, his voice breathless with relief. "You just keep quiet at work tomorrow." He turned his back on me and rushed out of the home office, completely unaware that the documents he had just executed contained a lethal, meticulously placed edit. I sat in the quiet room, the tears instantly drying on my cheeks. The panic vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating anticipation. The digital guillotine was fully armed, and Nathan had just willingly placed his head on the block. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind Nathan, leaving a hollow resonance in the foyer. I stood alone in my home office, staring at the empty space on my desk where the 70-page contract had rested just seconds prior. My chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm, the manufactured panic draining from my veins. He had signed it. He had scribbled his name with that harsh, sweeping flourish, sealing his own fate. To understand the gravity of what he had just done requires looking at the meeting I attended 12 hours earlier. My father, Dominic, had arranged a private consultation with Victor Vance, a corporate litigation attorney who specialized in dismantling white-collar predators. Victor's office sat on the 42nd floor of a glass tower in the financial district overlooking the Hudson River. The space was sparse, sterile, and designed to intimidate. Victor did not wear a tie. His bespoke suit spoke of quiet, unyielding power. We placed Nathan's draft of the limited liability transfer on his polished marble desk. Victor scanned the dense legal boilerplate, his eyes tracking the text with the speed of a machine. He identified the structure immediately. It was an extraction vessel designed to liquidate my personal stock portfolio and the deed to my Adirondack cabin, shielding them behind a corporate veil. He told me that outright refusal would trigger a protracted legal battle. Nathan would use his stolen corporate funds to bury me in endless litigation. My father shook his head, stating we needed a lethal countermeasure. Victor smiled, a thin, sharp expression that did not reach his eyes. He proposed we use Nathan's arrogance against him. Men who draft predatory contracts rarely expect their victims to read the fine print, Victor explained, and they never expect their victims to edit it. He summoned his team of legal associates. For the next 3 hours, they deconstructed the document, keeping the cover page the binding and the dense, sleep-inducing tax liability clauses identical to Nathan's original draft. Deep within the core of the contract on page 42, they orchestrated a masterpiece of legal camouflage. Victor silently replaced the standard asset absorption paragraph with a devastating post-nuptial forfeiture agreement. The new clause was printed in the exact same font, utilizing identical margins and formatting. The legal mechanism it triggered was pure poison. It stipulated that in the event of any documented infidelity or the discovery of hidden financial liabilities, the offending party would immediately forfeit all rights, claims, and protections regarding marital assets. It legally stripped Nathan of his equity in the penthouse, his claim to our joint accounts, and explicitly surrendered his legal defense against my recovery of the stolen funds. Victor printed the altered page on the exact same high bond paper Nathan's firm used. We extracted the original page 42 and seamlessly inserted the lethal replacement into the stack. It looked pristine. It looked flawless. It looked like the surrender of my life savings. And now Nathan had signed it. The next morning, the Manhattan sky was a pale, bruised gray. I sat at my dining room table, sipping black coffee, waiting for the confirmation. Nathan had left before dawn, frantically rushing to file the formation documents with the state registry. He believed he was racing against the clock to beat the fake federal freeze I had invented. His greed had blinded him to any standard due diligence. At 9:15, my encrypted phone buzzed. It was a message from Victor Vance. "The filing is recorded," the text read. "The contract is legally binding. The trap is locked." I set the phone face down on the glass table. A profound quiet settled over the penthouse. The first major pillar of Nathan's destruction was officially cemented into the public record. He was now operating a multi-million-dollar shadow economy on borrowed time, holding a legal document that guaranteed his total bankruptcy the moment his crimes were exposed. I stood up, carrying my empty coffee mug to the kitchen sink. The intense psychological performance of the last 48 hours had flooded my system with cortisol. My shoulders ached with a rigid tension that standard stretching could not alleviate. I needed to burn off the residual adrenaline before I returned to the hedge fund. I needed a physical release to clear my head for the final phase of the operation. I walked into my bedroom and packed a sleek leather gym bag. I booked a mid-morning session at my exclusive Pilates studio in Soho. It was a private, high-end sanctuary, defined by its exorbitant membership fees and strict privacy protocols. It had been my singular escape from the pressures of corporate compliance for years, a place where I could sweat in silence and regain my equilibrium. I hailed a town car navigating the dense morning traffic down the West Side Highway. The city moved in its usual frantic rhythm, entirely oblivious to the silent warfare raging just beneath the surface of my life. I watched the pedestrians rushing down the sidewalks, feeling a strange detachment from the world around me. I was a ghost, walking through a graveyard, waiting for the rest of the bodies to drop. The town car pulled up to the discreet entrance of the Soho studio. I stepped out into the crisp air, the cold wind biting at my cheeks. I swiped my membership card at the front desk, bypassing the juice bar and heading straight for the women's locker room. The space was a haven of polished white marble, smelling faintly of eucalyptus steam and fresh citrus. It was usually empty at this hour, catering only to a few affluent clients who preferred the quiet, late morning slots. I walked down the row of pristine mahogany lockers, dropping my leather bag onto a tufted velvet bench. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the calming atmosphere wash over me. The trap was set. The federal evidence was secured. My assets were legally protected by the lethal edit. All that remained was the final execution. I reached for the zipper of my coat, preparing to change into my athletic wear. Then, the heavy oak door of the locker room swung open. The sharp, rhythmic click of designer heels against the polished tile announced an intrusion that felt entirely out of place in the humid, relaxed environment. I did not look up immediately, assuming it was just another corporate executive preparing for her workout. But then, a cloying, sweet perfume cut through the clean eucalyptus air. It was the exact scent I had caught lingering on Nathan's cashmere sweater the night before. I slowly raised my head, my hands freezing on the zipper of my coat. Standing perfectly framed between the rows of mahogany lockers was Audrey Lane. She was not dressed for a workout. She wore a tailored ivory designer suit that screamed imported wealth. Resting delicately against her collarbone, catching the bright vanity lights, was the $60,000 diamond tennis bracelet my husband had bought her with my stolen equity. The sanctuary was breached. The conflict had just stepped out of the digital realm and directly into the physical world. The air in the Soho studio locker room hung heavy with the scent of crushed eucalyptus and expensive citrus diffusers. I stood before the pristine white marble vanity, staring at my reflection in the vast mirror. The morning had been a tactical triumph. My husband had blindly signed a legal document that stripped him of his entire stolen empire. The adrenaline that had fueled my performance in the home office was now settling, leaving a tight residual hum in my muscles. I reached into my leather gym bag, retrieving my athletic wear. I needed 45 minutes of grueling physical exertion on a reformer machine to recalibrate my mind for the final phase of the operation. The heavy frosted glass door of the locker room swung inward. The sharp staccato click of designer heels against the polished ceramic tile announced an intrusion that felt distinctly out of place. Women did not wear stilettos into this sanctuary. They wore understated designer sneakers and oversized cashmere wraps. I did not turn around immediately assuming an affluent client had rushed in straight from a corporate breakfast. Then a cloying, sweet floral perfume cut through the clean eucalyptus air. It was the exact scent I had caught lingering on Nathan's cashmere sweater the previous evening. I raised my eyes, meeting the reflection in the mirror. Standing 10 feet behind me, perfectly framed by the rows of mahogany lockers, was Audrey Lane. She wore a tailored ivory suit that screamed imported wealth, a stark contrast to the modest salary of a junior public relations executive. Her blonde hair fell in deliberate, effortless waves around her shoulders. Resting delicately against her wrist, catching the bright vanity lights with every subtle movement, was the $60,000 custom-cut diamond tennis bracelet my husband had purchased with stolen corporate funds. The sanctuary was breached. The conflict had stepped out of the digital realm and directly into the physical world. Audrey did not belong here. The initiation fee for this particular studio was exorbitant, requiring a waiting list and peer referrals. She had actively sought out my private gym, navigated the strict entry protocols, and tracked my personal schedule just to corner me. She wanted to gloat. She wanted to look down her nose and see the defeated, irrelevant wife Nathan had undoubtedly described to her during their secret hotel rendezvous. She walked closer, setting a pristine leather tote onto the marble counter adjacent to mine. She pulled a tube of expensive lip gloss from her bag, initiating a masterclass in passive-aggressive warfare. "Roberta Wright?" she asked, her tone dripping with manufactured sweetness and mock surprise. "I am Audrey. We met briefly at the real estate charity gala last December. I handle external communications for some of Nathan's partners." I slowly zipped my gym bag, shutting out the noise of the studio beyond the doors. I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact in the mirror. My heart rate, which should have been spiking in panic or rage, remained terrifyingly steady. My training as a compliance officer took over. I did not see a romantic rival standing beside me. I saw a hostile liability, a co-conspirator who needed to be managed and neutralized. "It is nice to see you, Audrey," I replied, my voice smooth and level. She sighed theatrically, uncapping her lip gloss and leaning closer to the mirror. The diamonds on her wrist clinked softly against the marble surface. "It is such a small world finding you here, though I suppose everyone needs an outlet. The corporate real estate grind is so exhausting. It takes such a brutal toll on relationships. Do you not think?" She adjusted her bracelet, letting the stones catch the light, ensuring my eyes followed the movement. She let the silence stretch for a beat before dropping her calculated, venomous remark. "I see it all the time in my line of work," she continued, a condescending smile playing on her lips. "Highly successful men outgrow their environments. It must be incredibly difficult for older wives to helplessly cling to dead relationships when their husbands are clearly destined for much younger, dynamic partnerships. They just end up holding their ambitious husbands back." She was painting me as a pathetic, desperate anchor dragging down Nathan's skyrocketing potential. She was securing her own position as the shiny, upgraded replacement, the political asset Lorraine had groomed her to be. 48 days ago, at the airport, a comment like that would have shattered my composure. I would have fled the room, humiliated and broken. Today, backed by the heavily encrypted data locked in my father's war room, her cruelty was nothing more than an amateur annoyance. I turned away from the mirror, facing her directly. I offered a polite, vacant smile, matching her posture with absolute, unbothered tranquility. "The corporate world is indeed exhausting," I agreed, keeping my tone light and conversational, "especially when dealing with the complex architecture of modern wealth management and regulatory oversight." Audrey's condescending smile faltered slightly, unsure of my pivot. "My background in data analysis keeps me incredibly busy," I explained, leaning casually against the vanity. "I specialize in forensic accounting anomalies for high net worth portfolios. In fact, I was just reviewing a fascinating case study this morning regarding offshore tax evasion loopholes and domestic political action trusts." The color began to drain from Audrey's cheeks. Her hand holding the lip gloss froze in midair. "It is remarkable how sloppy some executives can be," I mused, tracing a finger over the smooth marble countertop. "They utilize obscure holding companies. For example, there is a popular mechanism involving Delaware entities. Say, a company named Zenith Holdings. They use it to funnel unverified capital into local philanthropic organizations. The Pierce Foundation for Urban Arts comes to mind." Audrey's eyes dilated with sheer, unadulterated terror. The smug, glossy facade melted off her face, leaving behind a stark, horrifying pallor. She opened her mouth to speak, but her vocal cords failed her. The lip gloss slipped from her trembling fingers, clattering loudly against the counter and rolling into the porcelain sink. The trail is always so easy to follow for someone who knows where to look. I continued stepping one pace closer. The illicit funds flow from the charity directly into high-end retail accounts. Sometimes they purchase waterfront property in the Hamptons. Sometimes they purchase custom-cut diamond tennis bracelets from the Diamond District, usually for around $60,000. She stepped back, her spine hitting the mahogany locker behind her. Her breathing grew shallow and rapid. The diamonds on her wrist suddenly looked like heavy iron shackles. I tilted my head, studying her panic with cold, clinical fascination. "The tragedy of these situations, Audrey, is the collateral damage," I whispered, my voice dropping to a sharp, lethal register. "The Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Internal Revenue Service do not care about curated social media profiles or PR connections. They only see wire fraud, tax evasion, and criminal conspiracy. And federal judges hand out unforgiving mandatory prison sentences for anyone caught receiving embezzled corporate funds." She was completely paralyzed, trapped in the freezing realization that she had just walked willingly into a cage with an apex predator. She thought she was taunting a clueless, discarded wife, blindly signing over her assets. Instead, she discovered she was standing face to face with the architect of her impending destruction. I held the power to incinerate her entire life, and I knew every single one of her secrets. I picked up my leather gym bag, slinging the strap over my shoulder. I did not wait for a tearful breakdown or a stammering denial. The psychological warning shot had been fired, and her terrified silence confirmed a direct hit. "Enjoy your workout, Audrey," I said, offering one final brilliant smile that conveyed pure lethal intent. "And take good care of that bracelet. I imagine the Federal Asset Forfeiture Division will want it back very soon." I walked out of the locker room, leaving the heavy frosted glass door to shut silently behind me. The encounter had provided all the adrenaline release I needed. The Pilates session was no longer necessary. I stepped out into the crisp Soho air, pulling out my encrypted phone. I drafted a brief message to my father and Leo. "The Mistress is neutralized," I typed. "It is time to finalize the gala." The response from Leo arrived before I even reached the waiting town car. "Project Phoenix is ready for hijack. Meet us at the War Room." The town car ride from Soho back to the Upper West Side provided a brief window of quiet isolation. I watched the afternoon shadows stretch across the Manhattan pavement, turning the city's streets into a grid of stark contrasts. The encounter with Audrey had served its designated purpose. I had planted a seed of profound terror in the mind of a junior public relations executive who thought she could navigate the deep, treacherous waters of corporate fraud. Now it was time to focus entirely on the architect of that fraud. I unlocked the heavy oak door to my penthouse. The scent of dark, roasted coffee greeted me, replacing the sterile eucalyptus of the locker room. My dining room remained a fortified command center. Dominic and Leo sat shoulder to shoulder at the glass table, bathed in the cool glow of 3 separate monitors. Leo looked up as I dropped my gym bag by the entryway. His eyes were bloodshot, a testament to the rigorous hours he had spent wrestling with encrypted firewalls. But a sharp, victorious grin cut across his exhausted features. "I cracked the final partition," he announced, tapping the side of his laptop casing. "Project Phoenix is wide open." I walked over, pulling up my ergonomic chair. My father pushed a printed ledger across the glass surface. His face was a mask of simmering rage, the kind of anger born from watching someone you love being hunted. "Look at the logistics," Dominic growled, his voice tight with controlled fury. "The audacity of this man borders on pathological." I scanned the documents. Project Phoenix was not a corporate merger or a commercial real estate acquisition. It was the detailed blueprint for a $100,000 charity gala at the Plaza Hotel. The venue rental, the high-end catering, the imported floral arrangements, and the premium open bar were all meticulously itemized on a master spreadsheet. Leo pointed to the funding source column on the screen. He routed the payments through the Pierce Foundation, but the origin point is undeniable. He is paying for the entire event using the stolen equity from your penthouse. My husband was throwing the social event of the season, a towering monument to his own ego, using the very cash he had stolen from my secure lockbox. But the financial abuse was merely the staging ground for a much darker execution. I clicked open a subfolder labeled Run of Show. It contained a minute-by-minute itinerary for the evening. The guest list included the most prominent figures in New York real estate elite, local politicians, and Lorraine's entire high society circle. Nathan was assembling a captive audience of power brokers. I read the timeline aloud, my voice devoid of any tremor. 8:30 post-meridian welcoming remarks. 9 o'clock keynote address by Nathan Pierce. 9:15 surprise vow renewal. Dominic slammed his fist against the table, rattling the ceramic coffee mugs. It is a public trap! The architecture of his plan crystallized before my eyes with terrifying clarity. Nathan intended to stand on that glittering stage and broadcast his fabricated dedication to our marriage. He would paint a picture of enduring love, forcing me to smile and nod under the blinding lights. Then, the very next morning, his lawyers would file the at-fault divorce, using the edited ring camera footage to claim I was mentally unstable. The vow renewal was a theatrical shield. It would make him look like a tragic martyr who tried everything to save his broken wife, rather than a predator who robbed her blind. "We shut it down," Dominic stated, his tone brooking no argument. "I can make 3 calls right now. We freeze the accounts, alert the venue management, and lock him out of the building. We detonate his world today." I stared at the scrolling itinerary on the monitor. The urge to dismantle his illusion immediately was potent. The thought of standing in that ballroom, pretending to accept his fake vows, turned my stomach into knots. But a premature strike would only wound him. A wounded animal with political connections and hidden offshore accounts could still fight back. "No," I said, leaning back in my chair. My father frowned, his gray eyebrows drawn together in protest. "Roberta, he is planning to humiliate you in front of your entire industry." I met my father's gaze, matching his intensity with a chilling resolve. "We are not canceling the event. We are going to let him have his stage." Dominic fell silent, waiting for my logic to unfold. "If we shut it down now, he will spin the cancellation," I explained, tracing the edge of the glass table with my index finger. "He will play the victim early. Audrey will deploy her public relations connections to control the narrative, framing us as the aggressors. We need him to feel invincible. We need him to gather his corporate bosses, his political allies, and his scheming mother into one single room. He wants an audience. We are going to give him one." I turned to the cybersecurity architect sitting quietly beside us. "Leo," I said, keeping my tone even and measured, "how secure is the audiovisual network at the plaza?" Leo blinked, processing the sudden shift in strategy. He pulled up a new terminal window, his fingers flying across the keys. "The plaza uses a centralized digital matrix for their grand ballroom. It controls the projection screens, the lighting rigs, and the main soundboard. It is standard hospitality technology, designed for user convenience, not high-level security." "Can you hijack it?" I asked. A slow, dangerous smile spread across Leo's face, revealing a flash of genuine excitement. "You want me to override their local system." "I want total remote control of the screens," I clarified. "When Nathan signals his technicians to play his romantic montage or his charity presentation, I want our data broadcast instead. I want to lock out the local technicians. Nobody pulls the plug until our presentation is finished." Leo cracked his knuckles, the sound sharp in the quiet room. "I need to write a custom script. I will have to clone their network protocols and build a backdoor gateway. Once I execute the command from this laptop, it will sever the local controls. The audio-visual booth at the hotel will be paralyzed. How long do you need? I pressed. 48 hours, Leo replied, his eyes already locked on the cascading lines of code on his screen. You have 36, I countered. The war room shifted into a new, relentless gear. The defensive posture was abandoned. We were actively building a digital weapon designed for maximum exposure. For the next few hours, the only sounds were the rapid clatter of Leo's keyboard and the rustle of Dominic's legal pads. I sat at my laptop, curating the visual presentation. This could not be a disorganized data dump. It had to be a flawless forensic autopsy designed to be instantly understood by a room full of bankers, lawyers, and politicians. I selected the security camera footage of Nathan and Audrey at the airport. I pulled the forged loan origination documents, highlighting the illicit wealth management stamp. I mapped the wire transfers using clean, animated graphics that traced the stolen equity flowing directly into Lorraine's fraudulent charity and out to the Hamptons property deed. I arranged the slides with the same meticulous care I applied to hedge fund risk assessments, ensuring the narrative was airtight. The final slide was the pièce de résistance, the post-nuptial forfeiture agreement, zooming in on Nathan's legally binding signature, proving his self-inflicted ruin. We were turning his masterfully crafted ambush into the inescapable instrument of his own annihilation. Dominic watched the presentation take shape on my secondary monitor. He poured a fresh cup of coffee, sliding it across the desk toward me. The visual evidence is undeniable, he noted, his voice a low, approving murmur. It will destroy his reputation and bankrupt his future. But financial ruin is a civil matter. If you want him in a federal penitentiary, a slideshow is not enough. My father was right. We had the digital guillotine ready for the plaza, but Nathan and Lorraine possessed enough elite connections to potentially evade severe criminal prosecution if the authorities were not primed to act. The local trap was set. Now we needed to escalate the conflict to the highest echelons of law enforcement. I took a sip of the bitter black coffee, feeling the caffeine sharpen my focus to a razor edge. Who do you still know at the Bureau? I asked, looking up at him. Dominic smiled, a rare expression that promised total destruction. I know exactly who to call. The analog clock on the wall of my home office ticked with a hollow, rhythmic precision. We were officially 48 hours away from the Plaza Hotel Gala. The defensive posturing was over. The digital guillotine was fully armed. But an execution required an executioner. I had the undeniable proof of my husband's corporate embezzlement and his mother's money laundering syndicate. Now, I needed to ensure the authorities were positioned to drop the blade the exact moment Nathan incriminated himself on stage. Dominic sat at the glass dining table, pulling out a physical, leather-bound address book that looked older than I was. My father had spent 30 years building cases against corrupt politicians and Wall Street predators for the Attorney General. He understood that in the high-stakes world of New York finance, justice did not move quickly unless it was pushed by the right hands. He bypassed the standard tip lines and bureaucratic channels. Dominic picked up his encrypted phone and dialed a direct, unlisted number. He was calling Marcus Vance, a senior supervising special agent within the Federal Bureau of Investigation who had worked joint task forces with my father decades ago. Vance was a bulldog, a career investigator who specialized in unraveling complex offshore financial crimes. Dominic spoke in a low, rapid cadence, offering a brief, cryptic greeting before getting straight to the point. He told Vance he had a fully documented, multi-million-dollar corporate embezzlement case operating out of a prominent Manhattan commercial real estate firm. He promised an airtight forensic autopsy, complete with routed ledgers, offshore disclosure forms, and a direct link to a compromised 501c3 nonprofit organization. Vance was skeptical at first, accustomed to informants offering fragmented rumors rather than actionable intelligence. But when Dominic mentioned the Pierce Foundation for Urban Arts, a highly visible philanthropic entity that routinely hosted federal politicians, the tone on the other end of the line shifted from cautious to hyper-focused. "Send the data," Dominic instructed, leaning forward in his chair. "Use the secure drop protocol we established." Leo, sitting adjacent to my father, did not hesitate. The cybersecurity architect initiated the transfer, routing the unredacted corporate tax returns, the forged loan origination documents, and the keystroke logs through a heavily encrypted virtual private network directly to the FBI's secure server. We sat in tense silence, waiting for the federal machine to digest the evidence. As a compliance officer, I knew the standard timeline for an agency to review and act on a fraud tip. It usually took months of preliminary audits and grand jury subpoenas. But we had handed them a completed puzzle, bypassing the arduous investigation phase entirely. 30 minutes later, the encrypted phone buzzed. Dominic's expression remained impassive as he listened to Vance. The agent confirmed receipt of the files. The forensic data was overwhelming. The FBI coordinated immediately with the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division to review the tax evasion components. Because Nathan was actively moving capital through Delaware shell companies to purchase real estate, they established clear jurisdiction for federal wire fraud and money laundering. Vance informed my father that emergency warrants and subpoenas were being drafted for rapid deployment. The Southern District of New York would be ready to move on the Pierce family within 48 hours. The federal trap was officially set. With the legal architecture secured, I turned my attention to the physical execution. If I was going to stand on the main stage of the Plaza Hotel and orchestrate the public annihilation of my husband, I needed to look the part. I could not appear as a devastated victim or a panicked professional facing a fake SEC investigation. I needed to project absolute, unyielding power. I walked into my master bedroom, opening the heavy mahogany doors of my custom closet. My eyes bypassed the conservative tailored suits I wore to the hedge fund and the cocktail dresses I had purchased to appease Nathan's status-obsessed social circle. I pulled out a garment bag containing a heavy silk designer gown I had bought years ago for a charity event, but never worn because Nathan deemed it too intense. It was a deep, rich midnight blue, almost black, shifting hues under the light. The cut was structural, architectural, and entirely unforgiving. It was not a garment designed for celebration or submission. It was a carefully crafted suit of armor. I ran my fingers over the cold, smooth fabric. Nathan had spent 6 years trying to mold me into a quiet, compliant accessory who would eventually surrender her wealth without a fight. He believed he had successfully broken my spirit with the forged documents and the psychological abuse. He was about to discover the fatal flaw in his methodology. You do not try to manipulate a woman who builds risk models for a living and expect her not to calculate the odds of your betrayal. The next 48 hours blurred into a state of hyper-vigilant preparation. Leo finalized the custom override scripts isolating the digital pathways to the Plaza Hotel's audiovisual matrix. We ran rigorous simulations, ensuring the remote hijack command would execute flawlessly, blocking any local intervention from the hotel technicians. I reviewed the visual presentation a dozen times, fine-tuning the transition between the security footage of Nathan and Audrey at the airport to the animated data graphics tracking the stolen equity. Every slide was a calculated strike, designed to inflict maximum reputational and legal damage. On the afternoon of the gala, the atmosphere in the penthouse was thick with electric anticipation. The war room at the glass dining table was finally dismantled. The laptops were packed, the printed ledgers shredded, and the coffee mugs washed. Dominic stood by the entryway, adjusting the lapels of his classic black tuxedo. He looked like an executioner preparing for a shift. He looked at me, his eyes softening with a rare glimmer of profound paternal pride. "You ready to drop the blade?" he asked, his voice a quiet rumble. I stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror in the foyer, the midnight blue gown draped perfectly over my frame, the heavy silk moving with a fluid, lethal grace. My hair was pulled back into a severe, elegant knot, my makeup flawless and cold. The panicked, tearful wife who had signed the lethal edit was completely gone. I was a weapon, fully loaded, and aimed directly at the heart of the Pierce family legacy. I picked up my evening clutch, slipping my encrypted phone inside. "I have been ready since the airport," I replied, my voice perfectly level. We stepped out of the penthouse and descended into the Manhattan evening. The trap was a reinforced steel vault, and every single person who had betrayed, plotted against, and stolen from me was securely locked inside the blast radius. The drive to the Plaza Hotel was silent. The city lights streaked past the tinted windows of the town car, a blur of chaotic energy. I did not feel fear or anxiety. I felt a terrifying, absolute serenity. The architect of my destruction was waiting for me under the chandeliers, completely unaware that he had funded his own spectacular demise. The analog clock on the wall of my home office ticked with a hollow, rhythmic precision. We were officially 48 hours away from the Plaza Hotel Gala. The defensive posturing was over. The digital guillotine was fully armed. But an execution required an executioner. I had the undeniable proof of my husband's corporate embezzlement and his mother's money laundering syndicate. Now I needed to ensure the authorities were positioned to drop the blade the exact moment Nathan incriminated himself on stage. Dominic sat at the glass dining table, pulling out a physical, leather-bound address book that looked older than I was. My father had spent 30 years building cases against corrupt politicians and Wall Street predators for the Attorney General. He understood that in the high-stakes world of New York finance, justice did not move quickly unless it was pushed by the right hands. He bypassed the standard tip lines and bureaucratic channels. Dominic picked up his encrypted phone and dialed a direct, unlisted number. He was calling Marcus Vance, a senior supervising special agent within the Federal Bureau of Investigation, who had worked joint task forces with my father decades ago. Vance was a bulldog, a career investigator who specialized in unraveling complex, offshore financial crimes. Dominic spoke in a low, rapid cadence, offering a brief cryptic greeting before getting straight to the point. He told Vance he had a fully documented, multi-million-dollar corporate embezzlement case operating out of a prominent Manhattan commercial real estate firm. He promised an airtight forensic autopsy, complete with routed ledgers, offshore disclosure forms, and a direct link to a compromised 501c3 nonprofit organization. Vance was skeptical at first, accustomed to informants offering fragmented rumors rather than actionable intelligence. But when Dominic mentioned the Pierce Foundation for Urban Arts, a highly visible philanthropic entity that routinely hosted federal politicians, the tone on the other end of the line shifted from cautious to hyper-focused. "Send the data," Dominic instructed, leaning forward in his chair. "Use the secure drop protocol we established." Leo, sitting adjacent to my father, did not hesitate. The cybersecurity architect initiated the transfer, routing the unredacted corporate tax returns, the forged loan origination documents, and the keystroke logs through a heavily encrypted virtual private network directly to the FBI's secure server. We sat in tense silence, waiting for the federal machine to digest the evidence. As a compliance officer, I knew the standard timeline for an agency to review and act on a fraud tip. It usually took months of preliminary audits and grand jury subpoenas, but we had handed them a completed puzzle, bypassing the arduous investigation phase entirely. 30 minutes later, the encrypted phone buzzed. Dominic's expression remained impassive as he listened to Vance. The agent confirmed receipt of the files. The forensic data was overwhelming. The FBI coordinated immediately with the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division to review the tax evasion components. Because Nathan was actively moving capital through Delaware shell companies to purchase real estate, they established clear jurisdiction for federal wire fraud and money laundering. Vance informed my father that emergency warrants and subpoenas were being drafted for rapid deployment. The Southern District of New York would be ready to move on the Pierce family within 48 hours. The federal trap was officially set. With the legal architecture secured, I turned my attention to the physical execution. If I was going to stand on the main stage of the Plaza Hotel and orchestrate the public annihilation of my husband, I needed to look the part. I could not appear as a devastated victim or a panicked professional facing a fake SEC investigation. I needed to project absolute, unyielding power. I walked into my master bedroom, opening the heavy mahogany doors of my custom closet. My eyes bypassed the conservative tailored suits I wore to the hedge fund and the cocktail dresses I had purchased to appease Nathan's status-obsessed social circle. I pulled out a garment bag containing a heavy silk designer gown I had bought years ago for a charity event, but never worn because Nathan deemed it too intense. It was a deep, rich midnight blue, almost black, shifting hues under the light. The cut was structural, architectural, and entirely unforgiving. It was not a garment designed for celebration or submission. It was a carefully crafted suit of armor. I ran my fingers over the cold, smooth fabric. Nathan had spent 6 years trying to mold me into a quiet, compliant accessory who would eventually surrender her wealth without a fight. He believed he had successfully broken my spirit with the forged documents and the psychological abuse. He was about to discover the fatal flaw in his methodology. You do not try to manipulate a woman who builds risk models for a living and expect her not to calculate the odds of your betrayal. The next 48 hours blurred into a state of hypervigilant preparation. Leo finalized the custom override scripts, isolating the digital pathways to the Plaza Hotel's audiovisual matrix. We ran rigorous simulations, ensuring the remote hijack command would execute flawlessly, blocking any local intervention from the hotel technicians. I reviewed the visual presentation a dozen times, fine-tuning the transition between the security footage of Nathan and Audrey at the airport to the animated data graphics tracking the stolen equity. Every slide was a calculated strike, designed to inflict maximum reputational and legal damage. On the afternoon of the gala, the atmosphere in the penthouse was thick with electric anticipation. The war room at the glass dining table was finally dismantled. The laptops were packed, the printed ledgers shredded, and the coffee mugs washed. Dominic stood by the entryway, adjusting the lapels of his classic black tuxedo. He looked like an executioner preparing for a shift. He looked at me, his eyes softening with a rare glimmer of profound paternal pride. "You ready to drop the blade?" he asked, his voice a quiet rumble. I stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror in the foyer. The midnight blue gown draped perfectly over my frame, the heavy silk moving with a fluid, lethal grace. My hair was pulled back into a severe, elegant knot, my makeup flawless and cold. The panicked, tearful wife who had signed the lethal edit was completely gone. I was a weapon, fully loaded, and aimed directly at the heart of the Pierce family legacy. I picked up my evening clutch, slipping my encrypted phone inside. "I have been ready since the airport," I replied, my voice perfectly level. We stepped out of the penthouse and descended into the Manhattan evening. The trap was a reinforced steel vault, and every single person who had betrayed, plotted against, and stolen from me was securely locked inside the blast radius. The drive to the Plaza Hotel was silent. The city lights streaked past the tinted windows of the town car, a blur of chaotic energy. I did not feel fear or anxiety. I felt a terrifying, absolute serenity. The architect of my destruction was waiting for me under the chandeliers, completely unaware that he had funded his own spectacular demise. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel hummed with the concentrated energy of New York's commercial elite. Beneath the vated ceilings and the cascading crystal chandeliers, the city's most powerful developers, politicians, and banking executives mingled in a sea of bespoke tuxedos and imported silk. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low murmur of high-stakes negotiations disguised as polite cocktail chatter. I stepped into the opulent space, my midnight blue gown moving with heavy, lethal grace. The architectural cut of the silk felt less like a celebration dress and entirely like a suit of armor. I did not scan the room for allies because I needed none. The trap was fully constructed. The federal warrants were secured, and the digital override was primed. I was merely waiting for the architect of my destruction to step onto his own guillotine. Nathan held court near the center of the room, radiating a manic, aggressive charisma. He shook hands with regional governors and corporate titans, his teeth flashing in that signature magnetic smile. He was playing the role of the visionary entrepreneur to absolute perfection, completely intoxicated by his own manufactured prestige. Standing just a half step behind him, desperately trying to project an aura of aristocratic belonging, was Audrey Lane. She wore a silver-sequined gown that caught every flicker of the ambient light, but her posture was rigid. The $60,000 diamond tennis bracelet rested heavily against her collarbone, a glittering monument to the stolen equity from my penthouse. She forced tight, practiced smiles, occasionally casting nervous glances toward the entrance. The psychological warning shot I had fired in the Soho Pilates studio was clearly still echoing in her mind. Before I could fully merge into the crowd, a sharp, manicured hand clamped down on my forearm. I turned to face my mother-in-law, Lorraine Pierce. She was flanked by Nathan's older sister, Valerie. They had clearly been assigned border patrol duty, tasked with intercepting the unstable wife before she could ruin the optics of the gala. Lorraine offered a razor-thin smile, her eyes raking over my midnight gown with practiced elitist disdain. She leaned in close, the cloying scent of her signature floral perfume overpowering the fragrance of the imported lilies decorating the tables. "Roberta, dear," she murmured, her tone dripping with mock sympathy and manufactured sweetness. "We made a slight adjustment to the seating arrangements." Valerie chimed in, her voice a perfect echo of her mother's venomous superiority. "Given the intensely high-profile nature of the political guests attending tonight, we thought it would be best if you were placed somewhere less overwhelming. We know how much the SEC investigation has stressed your nerves. We just want you to be comfortable." They were framing my blatant public ostracization as a profound act of maternal mercy. Without waiting for my response, Lorraine snapped her fingers, summoning a passing usher. She instructed him to escort me to my new table. I was led away from the glittering epicenter of the ballroom, guided past the massive, beautifully adorned tables reserved for Audrey's public relations firm and Nathan's corporate bosses. The usher navigated me to the absolute fringes of the room, finally pulling out a chair at a small wobbly table shoved directly into a dark, unadorned corner. It was positioned painfully close to the swinging service doors of the kitchen. Every few seconds the doors would burst open, releasing the harsh, jarring shouts of the catering staff and the clatter of industrial dishwashers. My table lacked the towering, elaborate floral centerpieces present on every other table in the room. It was a barren, isolated island of humiliation. Lorraine and Nathan had engineered a geographic manifestation of my impending erasure from their lives. I sat down in the shadows, perfectly camouflaged by the dim lighting and the chaotic flurry of the service staff. I smoothed the heavy silk of my dress over my knees and accepted a glass of sparkling water from a harried waiter. From my dark vantage point, I had an unobstructed panoramic view of the entire ballroom. I watched the grotesque pantomime unfold with a cold, terrifying serenity. I watched Lorraine float from table to table, whispering into the ears of wealthy socialites and prominent donors. I knew exactly what she was doing. She was planting the carefully cultivated seeds of my impending downfall. She was quietly telling the city's elite that I was mentally unstable, that my career was imploding, and that Nathan was tragically suffering under the weight of my erratic behavior. She was setting the stage for Nathan's grand narrative of the victimized, betrayed husband. I watched Audrey lean up to whisper something in Nathan's ear, laughing musically as he kissed her cheek in front of 200 people. The sheer, suffocating audacity of it all was almost magnificent. They believed they were utterly invincible, standing atop a mountain of stolen money and fabricated prestige, completely blind to the fact that the entire structure was rigged with high explosives. The string quartet abruptly ceased playing. The low, dramatic hum of the venue's state-of-the-art audio-visual system activated. The ambient lighting in the ballroom began to dim, casting a hushed, expectant glow over the crowd. The massive wraparound projection screens that lined the upper walls flickered to life, displaying a sleek, elegant title card celebrating the Pierce Foundation. A hush fell over the room as the guests turned their attention toward the main stage. Nathan straightened his tuxedo jacket, shared one final triumphant look with Audrey, and began to make his way through the parted crowd toward the microphone stand. The moment of his grand ambush had arrived. He was going to execute the vow renewal press play on the fabricated deepfake video, initiate my public execution, and launch his new political life. I sat in the dark, chaotic corner by the kitchen doors, entirely invisible to the cheering crowd. I reached into my evening clutch and pulled out my secure encrypted phone. The screen cast a faint pale blue light across my face. I opened the direct messaging thread with Leo. On the stage, Nathan tapped the microphone. The sharp, authoritative sound echoed through the cavernous expanse, instantly slicing through the low roar of overlapping conversations. He stood at the exact dead center, bathed in a brilliant, perfectly angled spotlight. He offered the crowd a dazzling, universally disarming smile. The sheer force of his projected confidence commanded immediate obedience from the room. Nathan leaned into the microphone, his voice a rich, resonant baritone. He began with a masterclass in false humility, thanking the esteemed guests for gracing the foundation with their presence. He smoothly acknowledged the prominent political figures in attendance, playing the crowd like a finely tuned instrument. Then, exactly as the run-of-show document dictated, the performance shifted. Nathan paused, lowering his gaze to the polished wooden floor of the stage. The bright, dazzling smile vanished, replaced by a mask of deeply practiced, agonizing sorrow. He took a slow, heavy breath, leaning closer to the microphone stand, as if he needed it for physical support. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped an octave, laced with a manufactured tremor of profound emotional exhaustion. He began a staggering, hypocritical soliloquy about the crushing, invisible burdens of a tragic, unfulfilling marriage. He spoke about the agonizing pain of trying to uphold sacred vows to a partner who had grown cold, distant, and irredeemably erratic. He painted himself as a stoic, dedicated martyr, a man who had poured his entire soul into a union, only to be met with relentless emotional starvation and deceit. He used words like betrayal and isolation, delivering his lines with such passionate theatrical conviction that several women in the front rows gasped, raising manicured hands to their mouths in sympathetic shock. Every single syllable was a calculated, weaponized lie, delivered with terrifying sincerity. He was standing on a stage paid for by my stolen equity, preparing to broadcast a fabricated video to destroy my character, while publicly demanding sympathy for the pain I had supposedly caused him. Nathan looked toward the back of the room, searching the shadows. And yet he continued, his voice breaking with fake emotion through all the darkness, through the terrifying uncertainty of the SEC investigation. I have never stopped trying to save my wife. He gestured broadly toward the crowd. I wanted tonight to be a testament to endurance. I wanted to renew our vows in front of the people who matter most. Roberta, please come to the stage. The spotlight swung wildly, searching the tables before finally pinning me in my dark corner by the kitchen doors. 200 pairs of elite, judgmental eyes turned to stare at the fragile, broken woman Nathan had just described. I did not stand up. I did not flinch. Nathan gave a sharp, definitive nod toward the elevated audiovisual booth situated at the back of the ballroom. It was the predetermined physical signal to his hired technicians to execute the file containing the deepfake video. The weapon designed to obliterate my life forever. The towering crystal chandeliers extinguished completely. The entire venue fell deathly silent. The city's most powerful elites held their collective breath, bracing themselves for the romantic montage that would seal Nathan's illusion. I looked down at the encrypted screen of my phone, my thumb hovering over the digital keyboard. I savored the absolute, devastating finality of the moment. I tapped a single, simple word and pressed send. Execute. The massive wraparound projection screens framing the Plaza Hotel ballroom snapped to a blinding clinical white. The transition was so abrupt and harsh that it momentarily washed out the veinted ceilings and the cascading crystal chandeliers. The string quartet, which had been cued to play a soft romantic ballad, remained frozen in the dark. Nathan stood in the center of the stage, his hand raised in a practiced gesture of welcoming anticipation. His magnetic smile stretched across his face, expecting the fabricated montage of our supposed marital bliss. He had spent months orchestrating this exact moment, relying entirely on my blind trust and his own towering hubris. But Leo, the brilliant cybersecurity architect from my hedge fund, had executed the digital override flawlessly. The local audiovisual technicians were completely locked out of the system, their consoles paralyzed by the backdoor gateway Leo had constructed in my dining room war zone. The glaring white screens shifted, snapping into crystal-clear high-definition footage. It was the security camera feed from Terminal 4 at JFK International Airport, pulled directly from the Transport Authority archives by my father. The timestamp in the lower right corner flashed in stark, undeniable red, dating back exactly 48 days to the Thursday evening Nathan claimed he was shivering in Chicago. A collective confused murmur rippled through the audience of real estate developers and political donors as the towering screens displayed the bustling airport concourse. Then the true subject of the footage walked into the frame. It was Nathan, unmistakable in his signature camel hair overcoat, pulling a sleek designer carry-on bag. The crowd watched as he stopped in the middle of the terminal. A moment later, Audrey Lane rushed into the frame. The camera angle was utterly merciless, capturing her face in pristine clarity. The entire ballroom, filled with Nathan's corporate bosses and his mother's high society circle, watched in towering panoramic scale as my husband and his 26-year-old public relations mistress engaged in a passionate, undeniable, deeply intimate kiss. The sheer scale of the projection made the betrayal inescapable. Their faces were 20 feet high, broadcast in agonizingly sharp focus across every wall of the opulent space. The hushed silence that had gripped the room instantly shattered. A tidal wave of scandalized, shocked gasps erupted from the audience. I watched a prominent banking executive physically recoil, his champagne flute slipping from his fingers and shattering against the marble floor. Audrey, who had been standing near the front of the stage, expecting a grand public proposal, let out a high, strangled sound of pure horror. Her hands flew to cover her face as the surrounding guests instinctively stepped away from her, treating her like a sudden contagion. The $60,000 diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist caught the harsh glare of the projectors, flashing like a beacon of guilt. Up on the stage, the solitary spotlight still pinned Nathan like an insect on a specimen board. The blood completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a hollow, terrified ghost. He stared up at the screens, his mouth opening and closing without sound, the microphone hanging uselessly in his trembling hand. He frantically waved his free arm toward the elevated audiovisual booth, silently screaming for his hired technicians to cut the feed. But the system was locked tight. Before the initial shock could even begin to settle, the airport footage snapped to black, plunging the room into a brief, heart-stopping darkness. A new visual violently seized the screens. There was no audio, only a ruthless, crisp data visualization that moved with the terrifying clinical efficiency of a corporate autopsy. I had designed these graphics using my compliance training, ensuring they would be instantly understood by a room full of financial sharks and legal predators. A sleek animated ledger appeared, displaying my personal premarital real estate portfolio. The audience watched as a thick, glowing red line emerged from my assets, labeling the exact date and the staggering $750,000 amount of the home equity line of credit that Nathan had fraudulently authorized. The graphic tracked the stolen funds with brutal forensic clarity. The red lines snaked across the screens, flowing out of my accounts and fracturing into smaller streams. It passed through the corrupt wealth management portals, exposing the forged electronic notary stamp for the entire room to see. The visualization displayed the routing numbers, the dates, and the corporate entity names, leaving absolutely no room for interpretation or denial. The entire room watched the undeniable architecture of embezzlement unfold before their eyes. Then the presentation shifted, exposing the true depth of the conspiracy. The red streams converged, flowing directly into the accounts of the Pierce Foundation for Urban Arts. The screens highlighted Lorraine Pierce's name as the primary registered agent, definitively linking the esteemed philanthropic charity to a massive money laundering operation. Lorraine, who had been floating through the crowd with venomous pride just minutes prior, was now leaning heavily against a decorative pillar near the entrance. She clutched her chest, her perfectly manicured hands trembling violently as she watched her pristine social empire be publicly incinerated. Her elite friends, the donors she had courted for decades, were already exchanging panicked glances, silently coordinating their immediate exits. The data visualization tracked the laundered money flowing out of the fake charity and pouring directly into the property deed for the luxury Hamptons summer house. The names on the deed flashed in massive, unmistakable letters: Nathan Pierce and Audrey Lane. It was a masterpiece of corruption, a flawless demonstration of wire fraud, tax evasion, and criminal conspiracy. Nathan had not merely bought a love nest. He had compromised the integrity of his multi-billion-dollar commercial real estate firm and turned his own mother into a federal accomplice. The low murmur of the crowd rapidly escalated into a deafening roar of outrage, disgust, and aggressive whispering. Corporate executives, who had just shaken Nathan's hand, were visibly pulling out their phones frantically, stepping away from the tables to initiate damage control and sever their professional ties. Nathan stood completely paralyzed on the stage, the sheer weight of his public annihilation pressing down on him. He looked wildly around the room, desperately searching the faces of the people he had tried to impress, finding nothing but profound disgust and aggressive condemnation. The masterfully crafted ambush he had designed to destroy me had been perfectly inverted, executing him on his own stage. And yet, as I watched him crumble under the towering screens of his own guilt, I knew the most devastating phase of the counteroffensive was still queued up. The Hamptons deed faded from the screens, snapping to an unforgiving, blinding white. The digital projection shifted seamlessly from financial forensics to cold, hard jurisprudence. A scanned legal document materialized, towering over the panicked ballroom. The bold, capitalized header read, Post-Nuptial Asset Forfeiture Agreement. I had highlighted the key clauses in a bright neon yellow, making it absolutely impossible for the room full of highly educated attorneys and corporate titans to miss the implications. The text explicitly detailed that in the event of infidelity or financial malfeasance, the signatory surrendered all rights claims and access to the marital estate. The camera zoomed in, ruthlessly magnifying the bottom of the final page until a single, sprawling signature filled the 20-foot displays. It was Nathan's distinct, arrogant scrawl. He had signed away his life, utterly convinced of his own invincibility, blinded by his absolute certainty that I was a panicked, naive wife who would never possess the intelligence to trap him. The collective gasp from the legal professionals in the room was a distinct sound of its own. A sharp intake of breath as they realized my husband had not only been caught committing federal crimes, but he had legally, bindingly bankrupted himself. He was left with nothing but the rented tuxedo on his back and a mountain of catastrophic debt. The visual made it explicitly clear that due to his own hubris, his stolen empire was legally dissolved. The execution was absolute. But the fallout from a public dismantling of this magnitude extends far beyond social humiliation. The data broadcasting on those screens contained actionable federal evidence, and the guests in that room understood the severe legal ramifications of proximity to a money laundering syndicate. The panicked murmurs evolved into a frantic physical scramble. The city's most influential power brokers, terrified of being subpoenaed or associated with the Pierce Foundation, began moving toward the grand double doors. The real-world consequences were about to crash into the ballroom, transforming a shattered illusion into a federal crime scene. The silence that followed the data projection was a vacuum, an instant where the reality of the situation crashed into the minds of the New York elite. Then the vacuum collapsed. The Plaza Hotel ballroom erupted into absolute, unmitigated chaos. The meticulously curated illusion of a high society charity gala shattered into a frantic, desperate scramble for self-preservation. The guests in that room were not naive tourists. They were lawyers, bankers, and political operators who intimately understood the toxic legal blast radius of a federal money laundering conspiracy. Proximity to the Pierce Foundation was no longer a badge of aristocratic honor. It was a potential subpoena. I remained standing in the shadows near the kitchen service doors, watching the structure of Nathan's arrogance burn to the ground. In the front row, Arthur Sterling, the chief executive officer of the commercial real estate trust where Nathan served as vice president, reacted with cold, terrifying pragmatism. Sterling was a titan of Manhattan property acquisitions, a man who had built a multi-billion-dollar empire by cutting away infected tissue. He did not yell or panic. He stood up, pulled a sleek smartphone from his tailored tuxedo pocket, and dialed. Through the cacophony of the panicking crowd, I watched his lips move. He was not calling his internal crisis management team to strategize a cover-up. He was dialing the direct line to the regional director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, reporting an ongoing corporate embezzlement in real time to secure his own immunity. Up on the main stage, the polished, charismatic entrepreneur had been eradicated. Nathan dropped heavily to his knees, the expensive fabric of his trousers hitting the polished wood. The single spotlight beat down on him, illuminating the sweat pooling on his forehead. He stared at the towering screens, watching his forged signatures rotate endlessly alongside the undeniable offshore bank transfers. The reality of his inescapable annihilation finally breached the thick walls of his narcissism. A sound ripped from his throat, a raw, ragged shriek of manic disbelief. He threw his hands over his ears, desperately begging for the projectors to stop, for someone to cut the power, for the nightmare to end. But Leo had engineered the digital override with flawless precision. The system was entirely locked, feeding the indisputable forensic proof of his crimes to a captive audience. At the edge of the stage, Audrey Lane experienced her own rapid descent into irrelevance. The junior public relations executive who had cornered me in a Pilates studio, boasting about the inevitable rise of ambitious men, was now a toxic liability. Her colleagues from the PR firm who had attended the gala to network and secure lucrative accounts physically backed away from her. Her boss, a formidable woman who managed communications for major political campaigns, shoved her way through the retreating crowd. She stopped directly in front of Audrey, her face a mask of furious professional disgust. "You brought this radioactive mess to our agency," her boss shouted, pointing a trembling finger at the glowing data screens. "You used our accounts to funnel his statements." Audrey sobbed, clutching the stolen $60,000 diamond bracelet against her chest, as if the stones could somehow shield her from the fallout. "I did not know," she stammered, the words spilling out in a pathetic, desperate rush. "He told me it was clean capital." "You are drafting the crisis release," her boss snarled, showing absolutely zero mercy. "You are going to write the statement disavowing the Pierce Foundation and outlining the disturbing events of this evening. And you are going to submit your resignation before midnight." In a moment of breathtaking poetic justice, the mistress was forced to author her own professional ruin. She was tasked with managing the public relations catastrophe she had actively helped create. Across the churning sea of fleeing socialites, I tracked Lorraine Pierce. The venomous superiority that had defined her entire existence on the Upper East Side was gone. The aristocratic grace had evaporated, replaced instantly by the primal terror of a cornered animal. Realizing that the federal money laundering web explicitly named her phony philanthropic trust and detailed every fraudulent transfer she attempted to abandon her son to the wolves, Lorraine practically pushed her way through the stampeding crowd, using her heavy designer clutch as a battering ram as she made a panicked sprint toward the grand double doors of the ballroom. She thought she could simply slip away into the Manhattan night, retreat to her townhouse, and hire enough expensive lawyers to bury her involvement before the authorities arrived. She was dead wrong. As she reached the sweeping exit, the heavy brass doors were pushed open from the outside. Dominic stepped into the threshold. My father was impeccably dressed in his black tuxedo, his posture rigid and authoritative. He stood like an immovable wall of justice, blocking her escape route. Lorraine skidded to a halt, gasping for breath, demanding he step aside with her usual screeching entitlement. "Do you know who I am?" she shrieked, her voice cracking with desperation. Dominic did not move an inch. Instead, he reached into his tailored breast pocket and produced a thick, sealed manila envelope. With an expression of utter, chilling indifference, he thrust it directly against Lorraine's chest, forcing her to take it. "I know exactly who you are, Lorraine," he stated, his voice carrying the lethal weight of a seasoned investigator. "That is a courtesy copy of your impending federal indictment for conspiracy to commit wire fraud. The agents will be waiting at your townhouse." Lorraine stared down at the document as if it were a live grenade, her jaw slackening, the last remnants of her elite arrogance drained away into the carpet. It was time. I stepped out of the shadows, my midnight blue silk gown moving with a fluid, unbothered grace. I did not rush. I did not flinch when panicked guests bumped past me. I was a ghost, gliding through a graveyard, completely untouched by the carnage unfolding on all sides. I passed the stage, ignoring Nathan's pathetic sobbing pleas as he curled into a fetal position under the glaring lights. I ignored Audrey, who was typing frantically on her phone, drafting the press release of her own destruction. I walked purposefully toward the grand doors. As I approached the vestibule, Lorraine's daughter Valerie stood paralyzed beside her mother, staring blankly at the federal indictment. She looked up, her eyes wide with shock terror and the sudden, sickening realization of who had orchestrated their total downfall. I did not offer her a razor-thin smile. I did not whisper a conspiratorial threat. I simply stopped, extended my arm, and pressed my empty crystal water glass directly into her trembling manicured hand. I let her take the burden of my trash, a silent, final confirmation of her complete irrelevance to my future. I turned my back on the Pierce family, on the hyperventilating panic, and on the echoing screams of my ruined husband. I stepped through the grand double doors and out into the crisp, cool Manhattan night. The city air smelled of exhaust and possibility. I walked down the limestone steps of the Plaza Hotel, feeling lighter than I had in 6 years. 3 hours later, long after the FBI had raided the ballroom, Nathan arrived at the Upper West Side penthouse. The digital locks on the front door flashed a solid, unyielding red, rejecting his access codes. Sitting on the curb directly outside the service entrance were his custom-tailored suits, haphazardly shoved into garbage bags. Resting perfectly balanced on top of the trash was the cheap, generic Chicago snow globe. The glass dome was completely shattered. The fake snow mixed with the city grit, a broken enclosure for a man who had finally run out of lies. The morning air sweeping off Saranac Lake carried the sharp, clean scent of pine needles and damp earth, a stark contrast to the stifling perfume and panic that had filled the Plaza Hotel ballroom 6 months prior. I stood on the cedar terrace of my Adirondack estate, wrapping both hands around a thick ceramic mug of dark roast coffee. The surface of the water stretched out before me, a mirror of deep slate gray, reflecting the rolling peaks of the surrounding mountains. There were no sirens here, no flashing projector screens, no hushed whispers of corporate scandal, just the quiet rustle of the wind through the evergreens and the steady rhythmic lapping of the current against the wooden dock. The transition from a betrayed wife to an emancipated woman had occurred with brutal mechanical efficiency. The divorce proceedings were less of a negotiation and more of a forensic autopsy conducted in a sterile downtown conference room. Nathan had initially attempted to fight dragging his heels during the preliminary discovery phase, clinging to a desperate delusion that he could outmaneuver the legal system, but the post-nuptial forfeiture agreement he had so hastily signed proved to be an impenetrable fortress. Victor Vance, my litigation attorney, had presented the document to the family court judge alongside the federal indictments. During his final deposition, Nathan sat across the polished mahogany table, stripped of his tailored suits and his signature arrogance. His hands trembled as he stared at the enlarged copy of page 42, examining his own sprawling signature. He possessed zero leverage. Facing decades in a federal penitentiary for wire fraud and tax evasion, he could not contest a single term of our separation. His commercial real estate firm had fired him the morning after the gala, issuing a swift public disavowal to protect their tumbling stock prices. They liquidated his remaining shares to cover the compliance fines levied against their organization by the Securities and Exchange Commission. The man who had sought to leave me destitute, to steal the very cabin I now stood in, currently resided in a temporary holding facility, awaiting his federal sentencing hearing. His stolen empire was legally dissolved, the assets frozen, and the stolen equity meticulously returned to my primary accounts. The blast radius had extended far beyond my former husband, consuming everyone who had participated in the conspiracy. Lorraine Pierce learned a harsh, unforgiving lesson about the true nature of New York high society. Loyalty in those elite circles is entirely transactional. The moment federal agents raided her Upper East Side townhouse, seizing the financial ledgers of the Pierce Foundation for Urban Arts, her curated network of philanthropic donors evaporated overnight. Nobody wanted to be photographed near a woman facing a grand jury. Her phone stopped ringing. Her invitations ceased. Stripped of her social armor and facing the terrifying reality of a federal trial, she accepted a restrictive plea deal to avoid the maximum prison sentence. The terms required her to forfeit her properties and pay crippling restitution to the state. The woman who once hosted extravagant luncheons and looked down upon my career was now confined to a modest rented apartment in a borough she had previously despised, wearing a mandated ankle monitor. Audrey Lane fared no better. The junior public relations executive who had cornered me in the Soho locker room, boasting about the inevitable rise of ambitious men, discovered that proximity to stolen wealth offers no permanent security. Her career imploded before sunrise the morning after the gala. Her firm terminated her contract immediately, citing a severe breach of ethical conduct. The irony of forcing her to draft the crisis management press release regarding the disturbing events at the plaza remained a profound point of poetic justice. Drowning in legal debt from defending her role in receiving illicit funds, Audrey was forced to vacate her luxury apartment. The $60,000 custom-cut diamond tennis bracelet was seized by the Federal Asset Forfeiture Division, cataloged as evidence of the money laundering ring. Her carefully curated digital footprint was scrubbed from the internet, leaving behind a ghost, drowning in litigation, blacklisted from every reputable communications agency in the city. The crunch of gravel on the long driveway pulled me from my thoughts. A dark utility vehicle parked near the edge of the property, breaking the morning silence. The doors opened, and my father stepped out, followed closely by Leo. They walked up the wooden stairs of the terrace, bringing a tangible warmth to the crisp mountain morning. Dominic wore a heavy flannel jacket over a simple cotton shirt, looking more like a retired fisherman than a seasoned investigator. Leo carried a white bakery box, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses against the glare of the morning sun, taking in the expansive view of the lake with genuine appreciation. We gathered around a reclaimed oak table on the deck, sharing fresh pastries and pouring hot coffee. The atmosphere lacked the tense electric urgency of our Manhattan dining room war zone. We did not huddle over glowing monitors, tracing illicit routing numbers, or deciphering encrypted text messages. We simply shared a quiet meal. Dominic offered a brief update on the federal proceedings, his tone carrying the detached, peaceful indifference of a man who had permanently closed a toxic case file. "The sentencing hearing is scheduled for next Tuesday," he noted, breaking off a piece of a croissant. "Vance confirmed the prosecution is seeking 20 years for the wire fraud alone." I nodded, taking a slow sip of my coffee. I felt no malice. The boiling, toxic fury that had fueled my actions during those 48 days had burned itself out long ago, leaving a profound, clean silence in its wake. I did not care how many years Nathan spent behind bars, or how Lorraine managed her new reality. They were no longer variables in my equation. Leo leaned back in his cedar chair, looking out over the water. "The digital architecture held up," he murmured, an edge of quiet pride in his voice. "The hotel network administrators are still trying to figure out how we locked them out of their own audiovisual system." "It was flawless," I agreed, setting my mug down on the wooden table. I looked at the two men sitting across from me. They had provided the strategic framework and the digital weaponry, but the decision to drop the blade had been mine. I had survived the collapse of my reality by refusing to succumb to emotional hysterics. I had relied on data strategy and an unyielding foundation of self-respect. As the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, illuminating the distant peaks of the Adirondacks, my father and Leo walked down to the wooden dock to inspect a small fishing boat tied to the cleats. I remained on the terrace, enjoying the solitude. I reached into my canvas tote bag and pulled out my sleek silver laptop. I opened the lid, the screen glowing brightly against the backdrop of the mountain lake. It was not a file on offshore tax evasion or a folder of keystroke logs. It was a new corporate compliance portfolio for a major international acquisition my hedge fund was preparing to underwrite. I smoothed my hand over the trackpad, feeling a deep, resonant sense of control. The trauma of the betrayal was a closed chapter. My wealth was secured, my spirit remained unbroken, and my future belonged entirely to me. True power, I realized, opening the first spreadsheet of the morning, is not found in screaming or crying or demanding apologies from predators who are incapable of remorse. It is found in the quiet, undeniable finality of forensic truth. The morning air sweeping off Saranac Lake carried the sharp, clean scent of pine needles and damp earth, a stark contrast to the stifling perfume and panic that had filled the Plaza Hotel ballrooms 6 months prior. I stood on the cedar terrace of my Adirondack estate, wrapping both hands around a thick ceramic mug of dark roast coffee. The surface of the water stretched out before me, a mirror of deep slate gray, reflecting the rolling peaks of the surrounding mountains. There were no sirens here, no flashing projector screens, no hushed whispers of corporate scandal, just the quiet rustle of the wind through the evergreens and the steady, rhythmic lapping of the current against the wooden dock. The transition from a betrayed wife to an emancipated woman had occurred with brutal, mechanical efficiency. The divorce proceedings were less of a negotiation and more of a forensic autopsy conducted in a sterile downtown conference room. Nathan had initially attempted to fight, dragging his heels during the preliminary discovery phase, clinging to a desperate delusion that he could outmaneuver the legal system. But the post-nuptial forfeiture agreement he had so hastily signed proved to be an impenetrable fortress. Victor Vance, my litigation attorney, had presented the document to the family court judge alongside the federal indictments. During his final deposition, Nathan sat across the polished mahogany table, stripped of his tailored suits and his signature arrogance. His hands trembled as he stared at the enlarged copy of page 42, examining his own sprawling signature. He possessed zero leverage. Facing decades in a federal penitentiary for wire fraud and tax evasion, he could not contest a single term of our separation. His commercial real estate firm had fired him the morning after the gala, issuing a swift public disavowal to protect their tumbling stock prices. They liquidated his remaining shares to cover the compliance fines levied against their organization by the Securities and Exchange Commission. The man who had sought to leave me destitute, to steal the very cabin I now stood in, currently resided in a temporary holding facility awaiting his federal sentencing hearing. His stolen empire was legally dissolved, the assets frozen, and the stolen equity meticulously returned to my primary accounts. The blast radius had extended far beyond my former husband, consuming everyone who had participated in the conspiracy. Lorraine Pierce learned a harsh, unforgiving lesson about the true nature of New York high society. Loyalty in those elite circles is entirely transactional. The moment federal agents raided her Upper East Side townhouse, seizing the financial ledgers of the Pierce Foundation for Urban Arts, her curated network of philanthropic donors evaporated overnight. Nobody wanted to be photographed near a woman facing a grand jury. Her phone stopped ringing. Her invitations ceased. Stripped of her social armor and facing the terrifying reality of a federal trial, she accepted a restrictive plea deal to avoid the maximum prison sentence. The terms required her to forfeit her properties and pay crippling restitution to the state. The woman who once hosted extravagant luncheons and looked down upon my career was now confined to a modest rented apartment in a borough she had previously despised, wearing a mandated ankle monitor. Audrey Lane fared no better. The junior public relations executive who had cornered me in the Soho locker room, boasting about the inevitable rise of ambitious men, discovered that proximity to stolen wealth offers no permanent security. Her career imploded before sunrise the morning after the gala. Her firm terminated her contract, immediately citing a severe breach of ethical conduct. The irony of forcing her to draft the crisis management press release regarding the disturbing events at the plaza remained a profound point of poetic justice. Drowning in legal debt from defending her role in receiving illicit funds, Audrey was forced to vacate her luxury apartment. The $60,000 custom-cut diamond tennis bracelet was seized by the Federal Asset Forfeiture Division, cataloged as evidence of the money laundering ring. Her carefully curated digital footprint was scrubbed from the internet, leaving behind a ghost drowning in litigation, blacklisted from every reputable communications agency in the city. The crunch of gravel on the long driveway pulled me from my thoughts. A dark utility vehicle parked near the edge of the property, breaking the morning silence. The doors opened, and my father stepped out, followed closely by Leo. They walked up the wooden stairs of the terrace, bringing a tangible warmth to the crisp mountain morning. Dominic wore a heavy flannel jacket over a simple cotton shirt, looking more like a retired fisherman than a seasoned investigator. Leo carried a white bakery box, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses against the glare of the morning sun, taking in the expansive view of the lake with genuine appreciation. We gathered around a reclaimed oak table on the deck, sharing fresh pastries and pouring hot coffee. The atmosphere lacked the tense, electric urgency of our Manhattan dining room war zone. We did not huddle over glowing monitors, tracing illicit routing numbers or deciphering encrypted text messages. We simply shared a quiet meal. Dominic offered a brief update on the federal proceedings, his tone carrying the detached, peaceful indifference of a man who had permanently closed a toxic case file. "The sentencing hearing is scheduled for next Tuesday," he noted, breaking off a piece of a croissant. "Vance confirmed the prosecution is seeking 20 years for the wire fraud alone." I nodded, taking a slow sip of my coffee. I felt no malice. The boiling, toxic fury that had fueled my actions during those 48 days had burned itself out long ago, leaving a profound, clean silence in its wake. I did not care how many years Nathan spent behind bars, or how Lorraine managed her new reality. They were no longer variables in my equation. Leo leaned back in his cedar chair, looking out over the water. The digital architecture held up, quote, he murmured, an edge of quiet pride in his voice. "The hotel network administrators are still trying to figure out how we locked them out of their own audiovisual system." "It was flawless," I agreed, setting my mug down on the wooden table. I looked at the two men sitting across from me. They had provided the strategic framework and the digital weaponry, but the decision to drop the blade had been mine. I had survived the collapse of my reality by refusing to succumb to emotional hysterics. I had relied on data strategy and an unyielding foundation of self-respect. As the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, illuminating the distant peaks of the Adirondacks, my father and Leo walked down to the wooden dock to inspect a small fishing boat tied to the cleats. I remained on the terrace, enjoying the solitude. I reached into my canvas tote bag and pulled out my sleek silver laptop. I opened the lid, the screen glowing brightly against the backdrop of the mountain lake. It was not a file on offshore tax evasion or a folder of keystroke logs. It was a new corporate compliance portfolio for a major international acquisition my hedge fund was preparing to underwrite. I smoothed my hand over the trackpad, feeling a deep, resonant sense of control. The trauma of the betrayal was a closed chapter. My wealth was secured. My spirit remained unbroken, and my future belonged entirely to me. True power, I realized, opening the first spreadsheet of the morning, is not found in screaming or crying or demanding apologies from predators who are incapable of remorse. It is found in the quiet, undeniable finality of forensic truth.